Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, we invite you to listen to part 7 of the series. Chapter 103, Chapter 103, Chapter 102, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 2_1. Chapter 103, Chapter 102, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 2_1. He had felt something was wrong just now. The face in the mirror now looked a bit gaunt, appearing slightly older than his actual age. Fu Qian touched his own face and felt as if a layer of something covered it. It wasn't real skin. It must be some special kind of mask, but it fit so well that he couldn't find the seam anywhere. He didn't even know how he'd put it on. So, this time, was he acting under the identity of Fu Qian, wearing the mask of Fang Sun, and had forged Ding Yi's file? Wasn't this a bit too much? However, given the current situation, there was no need to take it off now. According to what Qin Feng had just said, the night watchman should have records identifying him as the transcendent Fang Sun, who had assumed the identity of Ding Yi to run this bookshop. While it was a minor infraction, Fang Sun was a reliable alias. Another point was that Qin Feng, who had died, never once doubted the realm of his power throughout the encounter. He hadn't noticed earlier, but now that he was paying attention, the aura he exhibited was indeed different from before, suppressed to around the 8th phase. Why was it so? Could be related to the mask on his face. It was an excellent disguise. Now, from this moment onward, he was the bookshop owner, Fang Sun. Of course, these weren't the most pressing matters at hand. There was still the decapitated corpse of a night watchman in his shop. Attacking a night watchman in Shangjing. Was that not overly audacious? The blast just now would have left him a goner if he had only the power of a beginning transcendent. Whoever had planned this must have meant to take him out as well. While thinking, Fu Qian tidied himself up a bit and washed his face. If the night watchman's influence in Shangjing was as strong as described, they should be arriving soon. He didn't plan on running away, as that would practically be admitting guilt. Being targeted by the night watchman would unnecessarily complicate the completion of his mission. Although he was suspected of forging documents, according to Qin Feng, he wasn't the only one to have done so before. It wasn't considered a serious crime. The reason they had come to him today was likely because of the theft. The night watchmen were probably just making a routine check. A few minutes later, Fu Qian sensed a sharp killing intent tearing through the sky, heading straight for his location. Clang! With a loud crash, the bookshop's door was smashed into pieces. The next moment, 2 figures, one after the other, charged in. As expected of the night watchman base, these two were at least at the 7th phase. Observing the newcomers, Fu Qian silently made his assessment. The visitors were a man and a woman, both seemingly in their 30s. Although their aura was slightly weaker than Qin Feng's, they were definitely at the 7th phase level. At that moment, the two who entered the room saw the chaotic scene and, especially upon noticing Qin Feng's headless corpse, their faces turned extremely grim. What happened here? The men demanded sharply as he looked at Fu Qian sitting to the side. That's exactly what I'd like to know. Fu Qian said with a puzzled face, pointing at Qin Feng's corpse. About 10 minutes ago, this gentleman burst into my shop claiming to be a night watchman and said he wanted to confirm some details with me. However, while we were having a pleasant conversation, he suddenly looked in pain, and then his head just exploded, ruining my shop, and almost injuring me too. Now you've broken my door as well. Could you explain what exactly is going on? Are you trying to tell me that you two were talking normally, and then his head just exploded out of nowhere? The man looked coldly at Fu Qian, clearly not believing a word he said. That's right. Fu Qian nodded. Then why are you unharmed? I'm relatively agile and can run a bit faster. The man was staring at Fu Qian with a death grip on his fists, as if he might lose control and strike at any moment. Fang Sun, is it? At that moment, the woman pressed his shoulder, signaling him not to act rashly. She pulled out a booklet and flipped through it. It looked quite similar to the one Qin Feng had, except the latter had been blown to pieces. That's right. Fu Qian nodded. You need to come with us. The woman closed the booklet and exchanged a glance with the men, saying coldly. Under the lethal gazes of the men and woman, Fu Qian was invited all the way to the night watchman base in Shangjing. It was evident that both of them were in bad tempers, but they didn't ask any other questions along the way, talking very little even to each other. No wonder it is one of the cities where the night watchman's power is strongest. Observing the building in front of him, Fu Qian nodded to himself. Within the tall walls was a vast expanse of gray buildings, and at the center of the complex stood an ancient-looking spire. Though it seemed old, the sharp design of the spire was still like a dagger thrusting into the sky. It truly deserved to be called a base. However, the atmosphere at the base was noticeably heavy. People were rushing around everywhere, and many had ashen faces. It seemed someone breaking into the night watchman base to steal something had made them quite angry. Escorted by 2 night watchmen into the base, Fu Qian received curious glances along the way. The 2 directly took Fu Qian to a room that looked like an interrogation chamber. After gesturing for Fu Qian to enter, the woman operated something on the wall, and the metal door slowly closed, fitting seamlessly into the wall. The inside became an enclosed space. The walls and the floor were all made of metal of the same color and had no windows at all. On the wall opposite the electronic door was a huge, long mirror, which was likely one-way glass. Besides that, in the large room, there was only a metal table and chair bolted to the floor. The 2 night watchmen didn't even take measures to bind Fu Qian. Presumably, they believed it to be completely unnecessary. Who would be foolish enough to strike within the night watchman base, even without restraints? In fact, Fu Qian really hadn't planned to make a move. The mission was to find something, and there was no rush for time. Lacking information and not even knowing what thorn blood looked like, it was better to follow a path of cooperation and mutual benefit for the time being. In the enclosed space, time passed particularly slowly. After a while, the electronic door opened with a beep, and a person walked in from outside. She was a woman whose age was difficult to discern. Her curvaceous body was hidden beneath a white cloak, her features delicate. At first glance, she looked tender and timid, but upon closer inspection, there was an indescribable dignity about her. Her clear eyes looked down from above at everything in front of her, as if no secret could hide from her gaze. Just being glanced at, Fu Qian felt his blood and energy subtly respond, sensing a threat. Hiss! Fu Qian took a soft breath. Another demigod. Chapter 104, Chapter 104, Chapter 103, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 3_1. Chapter 104, Chapter 103, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 3_1. Is the night watchman force in Shangjing overly abundant with talent? Is it actually a demigod who has come directly to question me? The previous Captain Qin Feng seemed to be only at the 7th phase. Could it be that he has discovered some issue with me and is preparing to destroy me humanely? Then my actions would really be akin to walking into a trap. In fact, according to the mission description, I am in a competitive relationship with the night watchman. It is quite normal to take some risks when probing for information in the territory of a competitor. Fu Qian suppressed his body's reaction, not showing any abnormality. However, he remained vigilant in his heart. The effectiveness of the mask's disguise was still uncertain. If I couldn't deceive this person, revealing a triple-layered identity, it would be extremely difficult to clarify. Perhaps I might soon have intimate contact with a demigod. Unparalleled challenges awaited at the night watchman base. Mr. Feng. Fortunately, the charming and alluring demigod was quite polite upon entering. She greeted Fu Qian with a smile and addressed him with due respect. However, her eyes observed Fu Qian's reactions throughout, not missing any detail. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Please do. Of course, Fu Qian didn't mind, he was there to gather intelligence. Thank you. First, let me introduce myself. The female demigod spoke gently, her demeanor calm. I am Yuan Shan, the person in charge of the night watchman in the Shangjing area. The person in charge? So she's the boss of the night watchman in Shangjing. Then her demigod realm is understandable. Turns out she is the second demigod I have come in close contact with. Compared to Ibu from the islands, she did not possess the same sharp momentum. The fact that she came to question me directly meant that the missing thorn blood was not a trivial matter. Fu Qian thought to himself while his face remained expressionless. I have long heard of you. Out of politeness, Fu Qian gave an insincere conventional response. Yuan Shan smiled unconcernedly. One of my colleagues had an accident while carrying out an investigation task in your shop today. Could you describe the situation in detail? I have already gone over the situation with those two. Fu Qian frowned, as if recalling the events. I personally also didn't really understand what happened. That Captain Qin Feng came to me first, mentioning some of my violations. About the current identity, Fu Qian still knew very little and could only speak vaguely in many areas. Fortunately, Yuan Shan did not seem to care about these details. I sincerely explained the situation, but unfortunately, Captain Qin did not seem to trust me much. As we spoke, he became somewhat emotional. And then, his head just exploded. It exploded just like that. Can you be more specific? To be more specific. Fu Qian appeared to organize his thoughts. His tone became a bit fierce, and after yelling at me a couple of times, before I could even respond, his expression suddenly became very painful, and then his head swelled up 3 or 4 times bigger, and right after that, it exploded. Are you sure his head swelled to 3 or 4 times its size? Yuan Shan asked earnestly. Absolutely sure. Yuan Shan did not speak, falling into a brief contemplation. But you were unharmed. After a few seconds of thought, Yuan Shan asked another question. Indeed, you are colleagues, asking the same questions. But Fu Qian keenly noticed that when Yuan Shan asked this question, her voice seemed to conceal a certain special rhythm. Listening to it was like basking in the spring breeze, or as if someone was whispering in one's ear, involuntarily plunging a person into its depths, compelling them to spill their deepest secrets. The psychic assault commenced without a ripple. Had the thug not reinforced his mental resistance, he might have carelessly fallen into her trap. The key had not been used until now, but suddenly employing it was incredibly natural and caught one off guard. This woman was quite a formidable character. Well, mainly because I don't quite trust that Captain Qin. I am rather cautious by nature, somewhat suspicious of his identity, so I have been keeping an eye on his movements. If anything seems off, I just... Fu Qian intentionally guided the reason he came to Shangjing to imply he had enemies in other places. His nested identities were already a point of uncertainty, so evading enemies provided a more plausible explanation. To enhance credibility, he remained thoughtful while speaking, following the other party's intonations, with a somewhat distant look in his eyes. Yuan Shan looked to be in a heavier mood after hearing Fu Qian's response. She was about to speak after a moment of silence when someone knocked on the door. Yuan Shan gestured lightly with her hand, and the door opened at her command. A man with a poker face stood outside, nodding at her. It was no surprise that it was a stronghold of the night watchman, teeming with masters. This one was at least a 4th phase. Fu Qian figured the middle-aged man outside must hold a not insignificant position at the Shangjing base. Yuan Shan glanced back and noticed the latter had an unusual expression. I'll step out for a moment. About half a minute later, Yuan Shan re-entered the room, her look at Fu Qian somewhat complex. I apologize for my people's lack of manners earlier. The unexpected incidents today caught us off guard, she said. No problem, he replied. Just now, she was clearly skeptic of him, but now. Fu Qian keenly sensed a change in Yuan Shan's tone. What new information had the man with the poker face brought? Please take a look. Did Qin Feng react like this before his death? Mr. Poker Face stepped forward and activated the device he was holding. Fu Qian glanced at it, recognizing the footage from a surveillance camera, seemingly of average quality and somewhat blurry. Still, it was possible to distinguish a figure sprinting at high speed, its head suddenly swelling to several times its size, then bursting into a violent explosion, leaving a headless corpse on the ground. Indeed, there had been another incident. Yes, just like that, Fu Qian affirmed, blinking. Yuan Shan and Mr. Poker Face exchanged a look. Thank you for your assistance, you may go now. Without another word, Yuan Shan beckoned, and a spirited young girl entered. You escort Mr. Feng out? Yes. The young girl crisply acknowledged, then gestured to Fu Qian to follow her. Mr. Feng, please come with me. Apart from confirming yet another casualty, there was no other valuable information for the time being. Fu Qian rose slowly, walking out under the unwavering watch of the young girl. It looked like the night watchmen were indeed reacting strongly to the theft and were casting a wide net in search of the culprit. In the description of his task, he was told to acquire thorn blood before they did. This meant he had to find the person first, or else the mission was likely to fail. Although he had washed off suspicion, Yuan Shan and the others remained on guard and unwilling to reveal any information in front of him. But not to worry. The role of a seemingly average alias was now coming into play. As Fu Qian maintained the motion of walking outwards, he opened all his senses to the fullest, sifting through the surrounding information. Soon, the conversation between Yuan Shan and Mr. Poker Face reached his ears. Just as expected. At this distance, the two had not considered the possibility of an eighth-phase transcendent overhearing their talk. Though not entirely clear, he heard a few place names. Yuan Shan seemed to be instructing Mr. Poker Face to closely monitor these areas. The name that was whispered at the lowest volume was a place called Hohai Manor. As a rule, the softer the speech, the more important the content generally is. Hohai Manor, noted. Chapter 105, Chapter 105, Chapter 104, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 4_1. Chapter 105, Chapter 104, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 4_1. Indeed, the best place to gather intelligence always lies with one's competitors. Under strict surveillance, Fu Qian was escorted all the way to the outskirts of the night watchman base. Valuing swift action, Fu Qian didn't waste any time. As soon as the night watchman girl left, he quickly hailed a car. "You want to go to Hohai Manor?" However, when the driver heard the address, his expression turned somewhat strange, sizing him up and down. "Is there a problem?" The driver's reaction was a bit puzzling. Fu Qian's biggest concern was that this place might be some secret code name, which would complicate things. No problem really, but not many people take cabs there. About an hour later, Fu Qian got out early some distance from his destination. From this spot, he could already see the majestic buildings connected in succession in the distance. This Hohai Manor turned out to be a genuine luxury estate, its size perhaps several times greater than even Shi Yuan's Huang family ancestral home. No wonder the driver was surprised. Those who frequented such places were likely to be famous and distinguished people, who would eat humble pie rather than take a taxi even in dire straits. Young people these days, too proud to admit hardship. Seeing Fu Qian get out of the car so far from his destination, the driver took the banknotes Fu Qian fumbled out of his pocket, all the while sighing and shaking his head. Unconcerned with the driver's misunderstanding, Fu Qian didn't rush towards the manor after getting out. Instead, he waited patiently on the side. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, a roaring sound emerged, and an ostentatious luxury sports car came zooming towards the direction of the manor. Snap! Fu Qian kicked and broke a tree, which unhesitatingly fell into the middle of the road. The sharp screeching of brakes echoed far and wide as the car rushed madly towards the tree, finally stopping just a few meters away. "This mountain I open, this tree I plant." Seeking death. The driver inside the car didn't give Fu Qian a chance to finish his line. Almost before coming to a complete stop, the car door swung open, and a white figure rushed out. The sound of raging wind began, and without any hesitation, the figure threw a punch at Fu Qian. He was indeed a transcendent, and one with a hot temper at that. Watching the opponent swoop in like a white bird, aiming straight for the vitals, Fu Qian felt a wave of emotion. So overbearing. Standing still, Fu Qian let the other rush up to him. The next moment, raising his left hand, he struck out faster than the eye could follow, landing a slap directly on the opponent's face. Faced with this deeply powerful slap, the figure could only show a half-formed expression of terror before being sent flying backward, unconscious before even hitting the ground. Fu Qian quickly followed, catching the man by the neck before he landed and hoisting him up in the air. Good, his clothes were still clean. Fu Qian nodded in satisfaction. Half a minute later, while furrowing his brows, Fu Qian changed into the head-to-toe white outfit and found a place to tie up the unconscious figure. He had been quite heavy-handed just now, and the transcendent would likely not regain consciousness anytime soon. Still, to avoid any interference with the mission, an extra precaution was necessary. Of course, considering that the transcendent was now dressed only in underwear, even if they woke up, they would probably not continue to the intended destination. After wrapping things up, Fu Qian lifted the fallen tree and tossed it aside, then drove away in the car with an air of nonchalance. After driving for a while, Fu Qian slowed down the car and began to rapidly alter his facial features in the rearview mirror. This process was far from easy. After putting on the mask, the difficulty of changing faces had increased by more than tenfold. Fortunately, the mask was tightly fitted to the skin, and it would still change with the adjustment of the muscles no matter what. Although the transformation wasn't as natural as before, which could result in the face of an ancient god if he wasn't careful. But no matter, take it slow, having a response was all that mattered. It took nearly 10 minutes, but Fu Qian finally adjusted his new face, ensuring at least an 80 to 90% resemblance to the original owner. The only problem was that the original owner's face was clearly powdered, a true epitome of pomade and face powder. Fu Qian found this unacceptable, so he gave up on that final touch. After resolving this issue, Fu Qian picked up an invitation from beside him. Mr. Chang Jiwen. This name. Fu Qian frowned for a moment as he read it. But having put so much effort into the disguise, he wasn't going to be picky. Come on, let's enjoy it. Fu Qian drove all the way to the front plaza of the manor, which was already thronged with luxury cars and bustling with excitement. According to the content on the invitation, tonight's banquet almost gathered all the celebrities of Shangjing, with each attendee being a member of the high society, or at least a young transcendent like Chang Jiwen. Upon getting out of the car, a valet came over to park it. Everything seemed peacefully ordinary. A few minutes later, Fu Qian stood in the banquet hall, observing every move around him. He didn't have much information from Yuan Shan, only knowing this place was a suspected hiding spot, everything else was unknown. For now, he could only watch and wait. If anything did happen, he needed to ensure that whoever was stealing wouldn't fall into their hands. In fact, as the banquet began, Fu Qian had already noticed suspected night watchmen entering, searching intensely for their target. This place was indeed under surveillance. However, it seemed Yuan Shan had already notified the host. The owner of Hohai Manor, amidst the fawning crowd, didn't show any displeasure. Luckily, he had changed his appearance, and from the treatment he had received so far, the man he was impersonating was also a new face. Up to this point, almost no one had come up to greet him, most people just gave him scrutinizing looks. The ladies, however, glanced over more, though their eyes mostly roamed around his figure. Brother Chang Jiwen must have been new to the social scene, hence the elaborate dress-up to expand his network. In contrast to his muscle-obsessed colleagues back home, this one was undoubtedly more savvy in the ways of networking. Wait a second, why does that person look familiar? After another lady's gaze swept past him, Fu Qian suddenly felt something was off. Raising his head, the person passing by him now had features strikingly familiar. Wen Li. Fu Qian was taken aback. He had a deep impression of this glass-like person he needed to protect. How come this lady of fortune was here? It seemed she was being treated the same as him at the banquet, both on the outskirts. She looked like a newcomer. Perhaps due to her attractive appearance, she received a bit more attention. Recalling the last mission, she was assuredly a sixth-phase transcendent. Luckily, his disguise was still perfect, and she clearly hadn't recognized him, as her gaze swept over him without any particular reaction. As Fu Qian pondered, he suddenly detected an extremely subtle chirping sound. Could this be? Immediately realizing what it was, Fu Qian kicked Wen Li in front of him, sending her flying. Chapter 106, Chapter 106, Chapter 105, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 5_1. Chapter 106, Chapter 105, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 5_1. It was evident that Wen Li's martial arts had improved after his upgrade. The kick he had just delivered forced Fu Qian to exert a bit more strength to dodge instinctively. In the end, Wen Li couldn't escape his fate and was sent flying several meters, crashing heavily to the ground in a move that seemed all too familiar. There were countless screams of shock in an instant. After kicking Wen Li, Fu Qian retreated diagonally in one swift movement under the horrified gazes of the crowd. Crack! A sound like crushing walnuts echoed ahead. Lights of red and white blossomed wildly, blood mist exploded into the air, continuing unceasingly. Yuan Shan's guess was incredibly accurate, something really did happen here. Fu Qian thought to himself. By this time, the room had descended into chaos. Although the party had mostly transcendents, the sheer number of people meant that there was also a significant ratio of regular high society present. Faced with an attack that could only be described as terrorism, screams erupted as people scattered in all directions, trying to escape. In the midst of the confusion, Fu Qian stood still, looking in the direction from which the sound had come from, quickly fixing his gaze on a middle-aged man. With a receding hairline, slightly overweight, and seemingly just an ordinary person, this man was hurrying along with the fleeing crowd. However, his expression seemed panicked, yet his steps were measured, not the gait of someone truly frightened. As for the fact that he appeared to be an ordinary person, Fu Qian was wearing a mask that could conceal his presence, so this was not necessarily evidence of innocence. Just as Fu Qian was considering how to follow him, he realized someone was standing in his way. This was a young man around 30, handsome and dressed with distinction, though his expression was uncertain and suspicious. If Fu Qian remembered correctly, this man seemed to have rushed over after he kicked Wenli. He probably came to seek justice but then got frightened by the sudden turn of events. Should Fu Qian take down this nuisance in the confusion? As Fu Qian was pondering, a clear grunt suddenly resounded. The next moment, the entire area was enveloped by a strange force field. Every movement felt as if they were trapped in thick syrup, facing immense resistance and moving exceedingly slow. Fu Qian looked up to see that everyone was affected the same way, with the fleeing crowd moving as if they were swimming through water, including the dubious middle-aged man. You could see that he was trying hard to break free of the constraints, but before he could regain his mobility, a figure leaped high from the crowd, accompanied by the sharp sound of slicing wind, stabbing straight into his back. Isn't that the host of Hohai Manor? Identifying him by the luxurious clothes, Fu Qian recognized the man as the center of attention earlier, whose name on the invitation seemed to be Qin Sheng. The speed was fast, even if the move was a bit odd. Fu Qian noticed that old Master Qin Sheng's movements were quite unnatural. It seemed he wasn't relying on muscular force, but some kind of invisible power was dragging his limbs into action. As Qin Sheng launched his surprise attack, the slow-moving middle-aged man had no chance to evade and was hit squarely in the back, splattering blood. However, the latter seemed to break free from the constraints through the impact, his body dissolving into a mist in an instant and swiftly vanishing before reassembling several meters ahead. At the same time, his appearance changed, becoming thinner, completely bald, with a sinister-looking face. Another screech tore through the air, even more piercing than before. Old Master Qin Sheng hesitated in his motion, unable to follow through with the next blow, and the bald middle-aged man crashed out through the window. Staring in the direction of the escaping man's escape, Qin Sheng waved his hand with a grave expression, and the syrupy force quickly dissipated. Shadows emerged from various spots in the banquet hall, all pursuing in the same direction. They must be the night watchmen. Among them, Fu Qian recognized the poker face he had seen at the base. Considering the number of them, Fu Qian decided against the idea of following. Let's just wait and see how things unfold, seeing as I've already memorized their looks and aura. If this individual was so weak that he couldn't escape this pursuit, at worst the mission would be a failure and a redo. When that time comes, I could simply find him in advance and take him out directly. Of course, even if I wanted to pursue, there's still an obstacle in front of me. Fu Qian looked at the young man before him, whose gaze continued to shift between himself and the blood-soaked ground. After Qin Sheng stopped the chase, he quickly directed his subordinates to maintain order and count casualties. The crowd had quieted down by this time. Inside the banquet hall, several headless bodies were lying on the ground, their brains and blood forming a shocking straight line. The only part where it was interrupted was right where Fu Qian stood. To kill so many people in one hit, and all with crushed skulls, seems rather savage. Could it be an ability related to the mind? Wenli, now much improved, had already gotten up from the ground, looking at the gruesome scene with a somewhat pale face. She had almost been trampled underfoot when the crowd scattered in escape. Raising her head to give Fu Qian a blank stare, Wenli approached and whispered her thanks. People around realized that Fu Qian's kick had been to save someone. Who are you? The young man in front of him also snapped back to reality and asked Fu Qian with a serious tone. Chang Jiwen. Fu Qian recalled after a moment, remembering the name he was currently using. Chang Jiwen. The young man frowned, apparently clueless. Your reaction just now, do you know something? It was evident that the young man was suspicious. After all, for someone with an apparently low level like Fu Qian to anticipate danger was unusual. Got a cramp in my leg. Fu Qian couldn't be bothered with him and made up something on the spot. You better explain yourself more clearly. The young man's expression twisted, his tone growing more hostile. Mingfei, you are being too impolite. Seeing that the young man was relentless, another person pushed through the crowd and stepped forward. This person looked a bit older and had a similar appearance to the young man, probably his older brother. Having such an incident occur at our banquet and suspecting a guest who was merely saving himself first, if word of this were to get out, the Chen family would lose all face. Chen Mingfei's brother spoke quite sternly. Mr. Cha even helped to save Miss Wen. We should, by all means, express our gratitude. Turning his head, the man apologized to Wenli who was nearby. Miss Wen, I am very sorry you had to experience such an incident. We will provide an explanation as soon as possible. Wenli was clearly very popular. Whether it was Qin Mingfei, who had rushed over first, or his brother who arrived later, both were visibly concerned about Wenli. But thinking about it, it made sense. A sixth phase transcendent with psychic powers at such a young age wouldn't be plentiful even in Shangjing. Her appearance as a loner just now was probably because she was new, attracting much attention but still in the observing stage, with no one showing it openly just yet. Thank you for your concern, I'm fine. Wenli shook her head, her gaze distant and thoughtful. Just then, the front door opened and Poker Face, who had gone out to chase the suspect, walked back in. The guests turned their expectant gazes toward him. Unfortunately, he merely shook his head slightly at Qin Xing. Returned without success. It seems that the person in question is somewhat capable. It's good news for me, after all. Chapter 107, Chapter 107, Chapter 106, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 6_1. Chapter 107, Chapter 106, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 6_1. The night watchman yielded no substantial results, and soon after Poker Face finished communicating, Qin Xing announced the end of the banquet, and everyone was free to go home. As the guests began to leave one by one, Fu Qian also drove away from the manor, pondering where to look up information about the middle-aged men, when suddenly he noticed a car persistently trailing behind him. Where had he slipped up and aroused suspicion? Fu Qian frowned in thought, inconspicuously slowing down his car. If there was indeed a lapse that had been detected, it was imperative to confirm and clean up as quickly as possible. As Fu Qian slowed down, the car behind rapidly caught up. The next moment, within Fu Qian's perception, he detected a familiar presence. Wenli. What was this girl up to? Fu Qian decided to simply pull over to the roadside, and soon the car behind followed suit and parked beside him. As the car door opened, it was indeed Wenli who stepped out and quickly approached. Seeing Fu Qian frowning at her, Wenli felt somewhat uneasy, glancing around to make sure no one else was present. Excuse me, are you Mr. Fu? This time, Fu Qian was truly shocked. With such a disguise, how did you recognize me? It really is you. Without waiting for his response, Wenli's face lit up with a mixture of surprise and joy, her voice even lower. I haven't had the chance to express my gratitude for your help last time, and you've saved my life again. No need to be polite, just think of yourself as the chosen one. It made no sense to deny it any longer, so Fu Qian changed his voice back. How did you recognize me? Indeed, he was a bit puzzled by this, since his disguise was layered upon layers. Your disguise was perfect, with no flaws whatsoever. Wenli shook her head, her face tinged with shyness. But earlier at the banquet, when you saw me, you seemed a bit surprised. And then when I was kicked just now, it felt strangely familiar, so I took a chance. Who knew that was even possible? Are you gaining experience as a masochist now? Before her upgrade, Wenli could already sense the emotions of the people around her, and after upgrading that ability must have been strengthened. It wasn't too strange that she could detect the changes in his emotions. This served as a reminder to be more cautious in the future, as this world possessed many strange abilities. All right. Fu Qian shook his head, muscles in his face moving, and quickly reverted back to Fang Sun's appearance. You are. Now it was Wenli's turn to be dumbfounded, instinctively stepping back. Double insurance. Fu Qian did not feel the need to explain too much. Oh. Wenli tactfully did not ask further questions, and after a moment of silence, she seemed to remember something. So last time, it was your true face. What else would you think? Do I look like a matryoshka doll to you? That's good then. Wenli looked at Fu Qian gleefully. This face is not as handsome as the previous one. This kid really knows how to talk. In an instant, Fu Qian decided to forgive her bold probing. Seeing that Fu Qian's mood was still good, Wen Li's features relaxed. After the breakthrough last time with your help, I didn't have the chance to thank you before you left, which has been a matter of regret for both me and my father ever since. That's quite the tall tale. I might understand your regret, but are you sure your dad won't be regretting he didn't thank me after seeing you disheveled from the safe house? I even went out of my way to find Captain Gu later to ask about you earnestly, but unfortunately, Captain Gu told me you hadn't been on the team long and he knew very little about you, so I had no place to start looking. I'm someone who keeps work and personal life separate. I never reply to messages outside of work hours. When father asked me to come to Shangjing, I hesitated, to never have expected to run into you so soon. Wen Li's excitement grew as she talked. Your current disguise is so meticulous, are you on some secret mission? First of all, this is a one-time thing. Fu Qian pointed at himself. Besides, your logic is a bit flawed. If it were a secret mission, could I tell you? That makes sense, sorry for my presumption. Wen Li hurriedly apologized, then suddenly remembered something. Your actions, they don't have anything to do with the night watchman's warehouse being robbed, do they? The girl sure knows a lot. Fu Qian became interested all of a sudden. How do you know about the night watchman's warehouse being robbed? I heard it through the grapevine. Wen Li laughed with a giggle. These past 2 days, I've been visiting some elders, and I heard that an incident occurred at the night watchman base. Apparently, an insider stole an item and fled, and now they are being hunted everywhere. I just thought it was news at first, but I didn't expect to run into such a thing tonight and nearly lost my life. Wen Li looked visibly shaken. Do you know the name of the person? I think it's Henrik. Henrik. So it seems, it indeed was an inside job after all, stealing the thorn blood. Although he had escaped tonight, he was injured. He hadn't escaped Shangjing before, and now it's even less likely, he'll have to hide. Presently, my real opponents are the same night watchmen who are also searching for him. Yuan Shan obviously knows something, she was able to pinpoint a place like Hohai Manor. This is information I don't have since the people and the item belong to them, I'm at a disadvantage there. Mr. Fu, where are you staying in Shangjing? Fu Qian didn't speak. Wen Li seemed to think of something and asked with gleaming eyes. Stay where? Fu Qian remembered his bookstore that was in complete disarray. That place was definitely not an option to stay. Whenever you have the time, you can come to my place for a visit, to let me express my gratitude. Wen Li handed over a business card. Fu Qian took it and glanced at it. At such a young age, she was actually carrying the title of vice president of the Wen Group. Has she been sent here to break new ground? Fu Qian shook his head internally. Wen Li was a legitimate middle-tier transcendent. Even if she was a business genius, Wen Xiuxian wouldn't let her waste her energy on something like making money. More likely, it's for consideration of her future, right? After a successful promotion, continuing to huddle in a small place would undoubtedly be detrimental to her development. Throwing her into Shangjing, where transcendents gather, ostensibly to develop business here, but essentially, it's to give her more opportunities to interact with the transcendent world. From the attitude of the 2 sons of the Chen family today, although she's new here, she's already received a lot of attention. Wen Xiuxian is not having an easy time as a father. However, attention is something I could do with less of. As Fu Qian pondered, he drove the car back to where the tree had been broken. After turning off the engine, Fu Qian found Chang Juan, who was still unconscious, dragged him out, threw him into the car, closed the door, and left swiftly. Even though I commandeered your clothes and car momentarily, I did help you shine at the banquet, laying a good foundation for your future networking. You're not at a loss after all. Chapter 108, Chapter 108, Chapter 107, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 7_1. Chapter 108, Chapter 107, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 7_1. Working overtime, indeed. Fu Qian concealed his breath as he silently observed what lay ahead. Before him stood the night watchman base. After parting ways with Wen Li, he did not return to his bookstore but came back to this place once again. It was already dark, yet the night watchman base was still brightly lit. People could be seen constantly entering and leaving, even more frantic than during the day. This indicated that the incident at the banquet had already reached here, setting this massive organization into motion. Fu Qian touched his face, his facial muscles swiftly adjusting. Of course, he was not there just to watch the fuss. The more the night watchman worked overtime, the closer he was to mission failure. Passive waiting had never been his style, taking the initiative was the right path. And he had a plan for just that. As the art of war states, create confusion to catch fish in muddy waters. When the environment was disadvantageous to oneself, one should stir up the waters. Right, he was going to infiltrate the material storage again. In the guise of Henrik. In the current situation, compared with the night watchman, he had too little information, still being significantly at a disadvantage. The opponent could be a formidable machine, with abundant manpower and a clear division of labor. To seize the initiative, merely following behind the opponent was not enough, he needed to uncover some intelligence that others were unaware of to create an advantage. For example, Henrik re-enters the night watchman base, seemingly searching for something. This piece of information would be puzzling for many, including Henrik himself. At that time, only he would know the truth of the matter. After a few minutes of adjustment, Fu Qian's features had once again changed. Of course, he had not transformed into the likeness of Henrik. From the encounter at the banquet, it was clear that Henrik possessed the ability to change his appearance. And as a wanted individual, he would surely disguise himself before entering the night watchman base. Using his actual face would just arouse suspicion. As for whose face to use, Fu Qian had already solved that problem. During the time he lay in wait just now, he had locked onto a night watchman who had stepped outside. This brother was not very strong, being only about 8th phase, which matched perfectly with Fu Qian's state after putting on a mask. Moreover, this person was clearly among the most basic level within the night watchman. Logically, as a base-level member, he would likely be running around until late, with no need to worry about him returning too soon. After adjusting his features to match those of the night watchman, Fu Qian decisively stood up and walked toward the night watchman base. The guards at the door glanced at the credentials in Fu Qian's hand and let him through. As expected, the security check upon entering the base was not strict. This was actually quite understandable, setting aside the fact that many people were coming and going. No criminal would typically think of breaking into a place like the night watchman base. As for the credentials, naturally, he had taken them from the night watchman he was impersonating. As a distinguished 4th phase transcendent, if he were to be detected even with this, he might as well not bother trying to blend in. Once inside the base, Fu Qian confidently strode forward. In the afternoon, he had already observed the layout of the base roughly. Plus, during his recent observation, Fu Qian had generally categorized several areas and locked onto a few suspicious locations. In his opinion, these places could potentially be where the material storage was located, but due to limited information, he could not make further judgments. And he did not need to. He was there to stir the pot, not actually to steal anything. If he delved too deeply and ended up trapped inside, it would be quite awkward. Then he might have to resort to more than just the method of transcendence. Following the route he had planned, Fu Qian circumvented the area where he had been detained earlier, making his way to the other side of the Black Spire. Compared to the opposite side, this area was much more deserted. Fu Qian's gaze swept around, quickly finding an entrance. Inside the entrance was a spacious hall where a girl dressed in the night watchman's uniform sat vigilantly. Behind the hall was a corridor, at the end of which stood a dark, menacing door, with 2 guards stationed by it. One had to say, the setup looked reliable. If it wasn't a storage warehouse, it was definitely some place of importance. As for himself, as long as he could stir things up, that was enough. Fu Qian stepped through the entrance without any hesitation. The girl noticed him immediately, her wary eyes tracking him all the way until he approached. "You're going down below." Fu Qian flashed his identification, but to his surprise, not only did the girl's gaze not relax, it grew even more vigilant. "That's right. Special permission is required to enter the sealed area for anyone below the middle tier. Where is your proof of permission?" The young lady sized up Fu Qian from head to toe for a long while. "Not a warehouse. A sealed area, off limits to those below the middle tier." Was there something remarkable below? Fu Qian thought to himself, yet his expression remained perfectly natural. "Proof of permission, I forgot where I put it, let me search for it." Fu Qian said casually, then covertly searched through his clothes. Of course, he had no such permission. He wasn't expecting to fool the other party with this ruse but to create a disturbance and lure the guards over. His movements undoubtedly made the girl more cautious, her hand quietly signaling under the table. The two distant guards had been watching all along and quickly approached upon receiving the signal. They were just too cooperative. Fu Qian silently commended the girl. "Without permission, you cannot enter. Register your information and then go back," said one of the guards, not nearly as polite as the girl, flanking Fu Qian from both sides, their tone cold. "Don't hurry, of course I have permission. Ah, here it is." Before the guard could finish, Fu Qian exclaimed, pulling his hand out of his pocket. For a moment, all three pairs of eyes were fixed on his hand. But the next moment, Fu Qian's palm opened to reveal nothing at all. The girl's pupils suddenly constricted and she instinctively reached for the alarm. However, halfway through her motion, an invisible mighty force struck her chest. A muffled thud resounded as the intense impact sent her flying several meters, knocking her out cold. Simultaneously, Fu Qian's arms suddenly extended, his fists reaching the guards' faces in an instant. Duang! Duang! The explosive force of the impact sent the two men flying, rendering them unconscious. Compared to the girl, these two were considerably stronger, almost at the sixth phase. But at such close range, they stood no chance against Fu Qian's surprise attack. In the span of a second, 3 people went down. Fu Qian didn't waste any time and headed straight for the door at the end of the corridor. The black door was made of metal, quite hefty, but it was not locked. Fu Qian slowly pushed the door open. Inside was a spiraling staircase descending into the depths, appearing aged and worn. Amidst the creaking noise, Fu Qian descended while observing his surroundings, soon finding another metal door at the bottom. There wasn't even a guard in front of this door. Without any courtesy, Fu Qian laid his hand on it and pushed slowly, the space in front of him suddenly expanding. What's that smell? How foul! Chapter 109, Chapter 109, Chapter 108, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 8_1. Chapter 109, Chapter 108, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 8_1. This unrighteous sneak attack. The moment the door opened, Fu Qian felt his senses were slightly assaulted. Behind the door was a vast underground space, partitioned into different sections by numerous corridors. Above his head, there were lights placed about every 10 meters or so, stretching into the distance. However, this huge space was currently filled with a dense red fog. This fog carried an indescribable stench, so intense and tricky, it could compete with a skunk committing suicide by swallowing feces. Ever since becoming a transcendent, Fu Qian's sense of smell had also become unprecedentedly enhanced, and was quite heavily impacted at the moment. Immediately holding his breath, Fu Qian looked around and noticed beneath the red fog there were strands of yellow-white tendrils. Whether on the ground or the walls, it was all these strange things, some winding in threads, others coiling and intertwining, extending into the distance. At first glance, it looked as if the building had come to life. Quite sinister. In any case, this didn't look like a scene one would expect in a night watchman base. Was the fog emanating from the walls? Fu Qian frowned. It was clear to see that on one side of the corridor, there was a row of identical doors, likely leading to separate rooms within. Considering what the girl above had said, it seemed something was being contained inside. As for these tendrils, Fu Qian squinted his eyes, closely observing their directions and found that their source appeared to be in the next corridor. Should I go take a look? On this way down, other than the 3 people he had dealt with above, he hadn't encountered any other guards. If he were to leave just like that, it seemed somewhat inappropriate. The effect of startling the snake by hitting the grass might not be good enough. Fu Qian quickly found a reason to justify his action, boldly satisfying his curiosity. Moving stealthily forward, Fu Qian followed the direction of the tendrils, walking towards another corridor. These things seemed to truly have the characteristic of being alive. Fu Qian observed the ground beneath his feet. With each step he took, it seemed he could induce a trembling in them. Before long, Fu Qian reached the corner. He maximized his stealth, quietly poking his head out. WTF. Down the corridor, there were a pair of eyes also looking at him. Fu Qian took a deep breath and recognized the owner of the eyes. Yuan Shan. Shouldn't you be outside capturing people? What are you doing crouching down here? Fu Qian had planned for many possibilities, but he hadn't expected to bump head-on into this boss. At the moment, Yuan Shan was standing in the middle of the corridor, in front of the door to one of the rooms. However, the door, which appeared very sturdy, now had a large hole in it. Thick, eye-catching tendrils extended from the breach, crawling over the walls and floor, spreading wantonly in every direction. Most of them, though, were tightly wrapped by a massive black cocoon, writhing incessantly inside. The giant cocoon was ripped into exaggerated shapes, yet it never seemed to tear. Was Yuan Shan trying to contain this thing inside? Fu Qian instantly understood what this demigod was up to. No wonder she hadn't gone out to capture anyone personally, it seemed she was dealing with an emergency here. But judging by the surroundings, it was only a temporary measure at best. Of course, now wasn't the time to think about that. Yuan Shan was still engaged in a deep gaze with him. Seeing that the demigod was staring intently at him. In an instant, Fu Qian realized how he had been discovered. The vibrations of the tendrils under his feet as he walked had been sensed by her. Run! Fu Qian almost instinctively turned and bolted for the exit. Encountering Yuan Shan directly definitely made for a sufficient startle for the snake. And it wasn't just her. In the brief glimpse just now, he saw at least 3 other people standing by Yuan Shan's side. Everyone's strength seemed to be no less than 4th phase. If they were the guards here, the lineup was simply too luxurious. No wonder there were no guards outside, they weren't needed at all. Fu Qian ran at full speed, racing along the path he had come. The moment he burst out from underground, he saw the lights flickering outside, and people were continuously rushing over. So he had indeed remotely notified his subordinates to intercept him. Fu Qian thought about charging straight out, but the next moment he felt a tightness around his lower leg, which had already been bound by 2 black ribbon-like objects. Since you're already here, why the hurry to leave? Yuan Shan's seductive voice rang out, and she emerged gracefully from one side, smiling at Fu Qian. This woman actually got ahead of him. Fu Qian looked at Yuan Shan, realizing that every demigod had their extraordinary abilities. Your actions are truly incomprehensible. Yuan Shan appraised Fu Qian while shaking her head. You have served at the Night Watchman for many years, always diligent and responsible. Recently, however, you activated prohibitions on your own, stole materials, and caused a mess below. And now you've returned. What exactly is your purpose? So he had found the right place after all. Had Henrik stolen the thorn blood from here? And did those muscle fibers with the foul smell also appear because of it? Fu Qian quickly extracted some information from Yuan Shan's words. Not saying anything, huh? Seeing that Fu Qian was silent, Yuan Shan shook her head with a gesture of her right hand. Don't worry, we can chat slowly. As she flicked her fingers lightly, more black ribbons kept appearing. They wove in and out, forming a dense net that swooped down toward Fu Qian. Planning to trap me in a cocoon like before. Seeing the black net coming over, Fu Qian shook his head. Sanity -1. In Yuan Shan's suddenly solemn gaze, the mythical form was activated. Practicing against a demigod was a rare opportunity indeed. Fu Qian glanced at his palm, sensing the changes in his body. The next moment, he leaned back, extending his arms. What was that move called again? A black and red burst forth, countless vine-like tentacles shot out from Fu Qian's limbs and torso. Boosted by the mythical form, each tentacle carried strength comparable to the previous biochemical demon arm, indiscriminately bombarding everything around. Tendril Barrage Devastator. Eclipsing the skies. Dodge. Under the terror of that one strike, Yuan Shan lost her calm composure. The myriad of black ribbons suddenly tightened, trying to stop the ubiquitous tentacles. But the apparently impregnable ribbons held for only a second before they burst apart with a bang. Boom. Almost instantly, the tentacles, no longer obstructed, blasted the entire hall into pieces, with countless fragments of stone and glass falling from above. The black cocoon was forcibly split open, and even a strong being like Yuan Shan had her breath taken away. Fortunately, Yuan Shan's obstruction had allowed the others to retreat in time, so there were no casualties. In the midst of the chaos, a tentacle grabbed a huge tree outside and then suddenly tightened. With that force, Fu Qian's body shot out, speeding past everyone, and he ran wildly away without looking back. Don't chase him. Yuan Xian, catching her breath, shook her head and stretched out her hand to stop the others. He's not Henrik. Beware of luring the tiger away from the mountain. Chapter 110, Chapter 110, Chapter 109, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 9_1. Chapter 110, Chapter 109, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, Part 9_1. I have to say, Yuan Shan, that woman is quite strong. At least, her skill with those black stripes is pretty effective against someone like me who relies on physical abilities. If it hadn't been for the mythical form, breaking free would have been quite a challenge. Having escaped the encirclement, Fu Qian ran wildly, his mind racing. No matter how you look at it, today's plan to stir up trouble exceeded expectations. Not only did I manage to infiltrate the restricted area, but I even had a direct confrontation with the boss of the capital Night Watchman. The mythical form skill is simply terrifying. If it weren't for its enhancement, the move I pulled off earlier would have had unimaginable consequences. Now, other than feeling a bit weakened from the overexertion, there are no other anomalies in my condition. Of course, that move might have exposed me as not the real Henrik, but that's not a problem at all. Just the fact that someone tried to secretly infiltrate the Night Watchman base is enough. It might even be better if they think Henrik has accomplices because of the disturbance we caused. Now, it's time to wait and see how things unfold, how everyone reacts. As it turned out, changes occurred faster than I had anticipated. The next morning, Fu Qian received a visitor. It's not who I expected. Why did this person come to find me? Looking at Wenli knocking on the door downstairs, Fu Qian was puzzled. True, I did give Wenli the bookstore's address when we parted ways yesterday. But with her intellect, she should have understood that I was not welcoming visitors. So why show up the very next day? Fu Qian had a sneaking suspicion and got up to go downstairs. After getting away yesterday, considering that Fang Sun's name was already known to the Night Watchman, he decided it would be best to return to the bookstore to avoid unnecessary suspicion. This building had a typical layout with a store on the first floor and living quarters. On the second, the previous incident had not had as much impact as one might think. And the Night Watchman's efficiency is commendable. By the time I returned yesterday, Qin Feng's body had already been removed, and the place had been cleaned up. The site now, except for being empty, didn't present any restricted scenes. Mr. Fu. Seeing Fu Qian coming downstairs, Wenli's eyes lit up. I thought I got the wrong place. You might as well say you doubted I gave you a fake address. With an impassive face, Fu Qian opened the door, gesturing her to come in and talk. Stepping inside, Wenli looked around and her expression immediately turned odd. Your store. Did it have a gas explosion? You're overthinking it. Yesterday a Night Watchman just had his head explode here, that's all. Fu Qian answered casually as he led her upstairs. Upon hearing this, Wenli shuddered, her face turning pale. She looked up carefully at Fu Qian. You killed a Night Watchman. Where did your thoughts go? Do I give off such a brutal impression? Fu Qian was quite displeased with Wenli. No. Ah. Seeing Fu Qian's expression, Wenli instantly realized her mistake and covered her mouth in shock. Head explosion. I got it, just like at the banquet. You encountered that Henrik yesterday. No wonder you reacted so quickly. The actual situation is much more complicated than that. You came to see me about something. Without further elaboration, Fu Qian led Wenli upstairs and got straight to the point as soon as the door was closed. It's not actually anything particularly important. Wenli hesitated slightly, then began to speak. I heard some rumors earlier that have something to do with the incident at the banquet yesterday. Oh. Fu Qian instantly became spirited. Let's hear it. That Henrik, the reason he appeared at the banquet was because of a reason. It's said that he was originally a warehouse guard for the Night Watchman, but over the years, he was influenced by the aura of transcendent materials, and his mind gradually became twisted. In the end, he couldn't resist the temptation, stole a crucial material, and fled. Unexpectedly, he lost his sanity and became bloodthirsty, continuously hunting transcendence, and his targets were invariably those with mental powers. So that's why he showed up at Hohai Manor, because the Qin family is a rare family that cultivates mental-type skills. I see. Fu Qian recalled the feeling of restricted movement he had yesterday. To have a certain impact on him, that old gentleman's realm must be quite decent. Transcendents with mental powers are relatively few, so for Henrik, the Chen clan youngsters are undoubtedly a group of perfect targets. It is understandable why he risked appearing there. Wenli spoke in one breath, her expression becoming forlorn. I actually find it hard to imagine, are transcendent materials that dangerous enough to make a night watchman of not a low level lose his sanity? It's not necessarily the transcendent materials. Fu Qian blinked, recalling the scene he had witnessed yesterday. Do you know there's a place called the Sealed Area in the Night Watchman base? The Sealed Area. Wenli was shocked upon hearing this, apparently having some knowledge of it. Besides, if I remember correctly, you're also of the mental type. You're right, I am, she said with a wry smile. Actually, that's also why I came to bother you today. I think he might have set his sights on me. What makes you say that? This morning when I was visiting an elder, I felt as if I was being followed on the way home, and it took a lot of effort to shake them off. Not surprising, leveling up like drinking water, being targeted as soon as you step out, you clearly have the treatment of a son of destiny. My ability tells me that the other party harbors clear malice, and I haven't been in Shangjing for even a month, so by rights, I shouldn't have any enemies, so. Your reasoning sounds plausible, but why did you come to me? That. Wenli appeared bashful. Since it's just my own feeling, I can't ask the night watchman for help, so I was thinking. Observing Wenli's hesitant expression, Fu Qian suddenly understood what she meant. You want me to return to my old trade and cover for you? Your capitalist habit of exploiting people is hard to change, huh? It must be said, the information Wenli brought was very valuable, adding some details for him. However, Fu Qian was interested not just in the content of the message, but also in the act itself by Wenli. Just yesterday, he had stormed into the night watchman base, aiming to stir the snake in the grass. And then, Wenli coincidentally ran into trouble and came looking for him. Although the entire cause and effect seemed very natural with no flaws. When linked together, there always seemed to be an odd taste to it. The likelihood of Wenli scheming against him wasn't high, but what if she was unaware? Of course, if what she said was true and she really was being targeted by Henrik, it would be like waiting for the rabbit by the tree stump. Just keeping an eye on her would bring Henrik straight to him, greatly simplifying the mission. No matter how you look at it, it's worth a try. Fu Qian turned these thoughts over in his mind and finally nodded in response to Wenli's expectant gaze. Wenli hadn't expected Fu Qian to agree so readily. She was pleasantly surprised and immediately mentioned that her car was waiting downstairs. Wait a minute. Once he was in Wenli's car, Fu Qian vaguely felt that he had forgotten something. Hadn't they talked about compensation yet? Chapter 111, Chapter 111, Chapter 110 Hunter Craves for Blood, 10_1. Chapter 111, Chapter 110 Hunter Craves for Blood, 10_1. Please rest assured, it won't be a bother for too long, the night watchman should catch Henrik pretty soon. Additionally, you don't need to follow me all the time. Just make sure I have someone to ask for help when it's crucial. Having successfully moved to her reinforcements, Wenli was clearly in a good mood, smiling brightly all the way and speaking very sincerely. Of course, if you could discuss salary issues with me, that would show even more sincerity. However, Wenli, true to the capitalist lineage, was full of gratitude but never once mentioned compensation, as if she had completely forgotten that part. Let's just assume the kid was overly excited. At this moment, Wenli was obviously more relaxed than before, talking much more than usual. Of course, if she knew that Fu Qian was planning to use her as bait, who knows what mood she'd be in. Confronted with the livelier young lady, the driver in front kept his eyes forward, driving the car with the precision and regulation of a robot. That was also understandable, given Wenli's ability to perceive emotions. Glaring wouldn't have escaped her notice. I should also be mindful of this moving forward. No matter how frail she may appear, she is now a genuine middle-tier transcendent. In conversing with Wenli, Fu Qian confirmed that it had been 2 months since the last upgrade incident. It was clear that, like Su Gao, he was a mysterious figure whose movements were unpredictable to them. The rich do love to buy houses wherever they go. About half an hour later, the car stopped in front of a delicately crafted small manor. While it couldn't compare with the Wen family's mansion, it was obviously quite expensive. This was where Wenli stayed in Shangjing. The place is a bit cramped. Please don't mind. Wenli giggled, pulling a direct Versailles on the spot. But for a world where martial strength speaks, her apology seemed somewhat sincere. Given the strength I had previously shown, it was not surprising that I would have some expectations for my quality of life, being a middle-tier transcendent myself. In this world, transcendent powers greatly enhance the earning potential for the poor. No sooner had the two stepped out of the car than someone came out to meet them. "You're back, and there's a guest who has been waiting for quite a while." Fu Qian glanced over and felt like he had seen this person before. If he remembered correctly, this should be the former butler of the Wen family. They sent him directly to take care of Wenli. It seemed that while Wen Xiuxian was intent on cultivating his daughter's abilities, he might also be considering shifting the family focus to Shangjing. A guest. Wenli looked somewhat puzzled and glanced back at Fu Qian. "Mr. Fang, why don't you go and rest first?" "Good, very tactful." Wenli was quite perceptive, addressing him by his current guise given that he had not removed his mask. In response to such cleverness, Fu Qian naturally reciprocated. "No need. I might as well fulfill my duty." Waiting like a hunter, the value lies in persistence. To prevent empty vigilance, one must never be distracted. "Then I'll trouble you." Wenli, obviously not expecting Fu Qian to be so dedicated to his job, thanked him heartily. Together, they entered the reception room where someone was already waiting inside. This person looked familiar. Upon a bit of reflection, Fu Qian remembered who this was, the youth from the Chen clan who had helped him out at the banquet the previous day. Earlier in the car, Wenli had mentioned him. His name was Chen Mingda, right? Chen Mingda, who had obviously been waiting for a while, stood up and approached as soon as he saw Wenli enter. "I'm really sorry about yesterday. I didn't expect such an incident to happen. I wanted to make sure you were all right. Thank you for your concern." "I'm perfectly fine." Faced with Chen Mingda's visit of concern, Wenli responded with a fitting smile. Then the two exchanged pleasantries typical of business etiquette, which nearly put Fu Qian to sleep. "This is..." Chen Mingda finished with the pleasantries and turned his gaze towards Fu Qian, a puzzled expression on his face. "Mr. Fang. A little accident happened at home, so I came over to borrow a place to stay from Wenli." Without waiting for Wenli to speak, Fu Qian directly said so and casually made up a reason. As a night watchman, he needed to hide as much personal information as possible. "Pleasure to meet you." Chen Mingda's expression showed no peculiarities, and he greeted Fu Qian politely. It was evident that this man moved with a unique rhythm, and his actions seemed different from ordinary people. Wenli had said that the Chen clan youngster specialized in psychic techniques, and it truly seemed a bit special. However, judging by the intensity of his aura, Chen Mingda was only about the 7th phase. For someone around 30, that wasn't weak. But relying on the backing of aristocratic families, ample resources, and added talents, he could only be considered mediocre. He was even weaker than that Chen Mingfei. Putting that aside, Chen Mingda fully demonstrated the upbringing of a major family's progeny. His conversation was refined, and every action showed cultivation. "Actually, there is another matter I came for today." After the trio sat down and Chen Mingda exchanged some pleasantries, he got to the main topic. "Miss Wen, have you heard? Last night, the night watchman base was intruded upon." "That happened." It was clear that Wenli was genuinely surprised. "Indeed, I also found it hard to believe my ears when I first heard the news." Chen Mingda nodded. "And it's said that demigod Yuan Shan, the person in charge of the night watchman in Shangjing, was also at the base at that time. And yet, they couldn't even retain the intruder, confirming this mysterious person's extraordinary strength. They couldn't hold down the person even with a demigod in charge." Wen Li's worldview seemed somewhat overturned. Could it be a high-tier transcendent? There aren't that many high-tier transcendents. I can't think of anyone who would do such a thing. The key is we still don't know his purpose. We already have a madman outside, now the situation has suddenly become more complex. You better reduce your outings recently. Thank you for the reminder. Wen Li's expression grew solemn as she nodded her head. In fact, Chen Mingda pondered for a moment. Considering you're very likely a target of Henrik, and now even the night watchman's side isn't safe, have you thought about moving to Hohai Manor for a while? Move to Hohai Manor? Wen Li was taken aback for a moment, then shook her head in refusal. No need. I will try to minimize going out recently and believe there won't be any problems. All right then. Chen Mingda seemed somewhat disappointed but gracefully did not insist. After some more small talk, he took his leave and returned to his residence. After seeing Chen Mingda off, Wenli turned her head and looked at Fu Qian in the distance. For some reason, the moment she heard about someone breaking into the night watchman base, she had an inexplicable urge to look towards Fu Qian. But now she dismissed the strange thought. Fu Qian was strong, she knew that. Ever since the last time Fu Qian helped her level up in an unusual way, she had had an unreasonable confidence in this mysterious individual. Otherwise, she wouldn't have thought of him immediately when she was threatened. But the term demigod was still something Wenli could not associate with the men before her eyes. News of an event that just happened yesterday, was it spreading too fast? Now Fu Qian was also wondering. Although as a member of the Chen family, Chen Mingda was well informed, the clarity of the details seemed suspicious. It was hard to believe it wasn't deliberate dissemination by Yuan Shan. Chapter 112, Chapter 112, Chapter 111, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 11_1. Chapter 112, Chapter 111, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 11_1. If Yuan Shan was intentionally not controlling the flow of information, then this action indicated she had some thoughts of her own. For example, she no longer saw this as a simple case of theft and defection. She must have believed that besides Henrik, other people were involved, otherwise, she wouldn't have made such a probe. After all, releasing any message to a mentally unstable madman would be meaningless. Whether her earlier attempt to startle the snake had been effective, or she had ideas from the start, remained unknown. After quickly reviewing the current information, Fu Qian looked up and saw Wenli watching him with a somewhat solemn expression. A thought crossed Fu Qian's mind. This girl was extremely sensitive, he needed to be careful to control his emotional fluctuations. Of course, he could not be completely without fluctuations, as being too deliberate could also raise suspicions. And he didn't know what new abilities she had gained after leveling up. Speaking of which, have there been any changes to your abilities since you've been promoted? Fu Qian blinked, asking directly when he didn't understand, an unmistakably straightforward man. There was a bit. First off, my physique has greatly improved. Apparently not expecting Fu Qian to ask this, Wenli smiled and clenched her fist. Almost all mental-type transcendents fortify their bodies after reaching a certain stage, though the methods differ. The higher the realm, the more noticeable it becomes. I feel that my strength has increased significantly now. Although it's incomparable to you, if we're talking about melee ability, I am now no weaker than a low-tier physical transcendent. Fu Qian nodded. Like that young Master Yi. Yes, like young Master Yi. Wenli repeated Fu Qian's words, this change clearly put her in a good mood. After my promotion, I took a month to stabilize my condition and didn't really see him much during that time. Then I promptly came to Shangjing. My father mentioned that our families haven't been in close contact recently. Completely understandable. The Yi family's scheme for a marriage alliance was based on the expectation that Wenli would put in a lot of effort in her promotion. The result was that they were of no help, and they had to watch as Wenli was dragged into the safe house. It might even have caused young Master Yi significant psychological trauma. Given these circumstances, a shrewd man like Wen Xiuxian would never let himself be indebted, especially given his daughter's boundless prospects. As for my abilities, my perception of emotions is now much clearer. Wenli pointed to her head. Before, I could only sense the strongest part of a target's emotions. Now, if I concentrate, I can perceive every subtle fluctuation of the target's emotions. However, the effect isn't as strong if there's a big difference in levels. Additionally, I've acquired a new ability, which I call emotional amplification. I can target someone and amplify their current emotional state, whether it's anger, fear, happiness, any type. In my tests, if I put my full effort into it, I can amplify the strength of the emotions more than tenfold. Emotional amplification. Fu Qian recalled the scene when Wenli first leveled up, with similar power outbursts making Group Leader Tan shiver in fear. Speaking of which, he owed Wenli thanks, it was her stimulation that opened the door to a new world for him, successfully completing 1/3 of the thug's path. Additionally, I've gained an unexpected benefit. At this point, Wenli's face wore a sincere smile. I'm no longer afraid of being alone. It's hard to imagine that the nightmare that troubled me for so long has just disappeared. Now, even when I'm alone in a room, my own emotions aren't repeatedly amplified. That sense of relief, when I realized it, I sat by the lake for a whole day and night. If I had known, I should have worked harder to level up sooner. If she had leveled up sooner, Yvette would have been the one chatting with me here. Fu Qian thought to himself, with one less mirror, of course there wouldn't be repeated reflection and magnification. But I won't tell Wenli that. As it seemed now, in terms of pure fighting strength, Wenli still didn't have much. In short, she was still an auxiliary profession. However, whether it was perception or the amplification of emotions, both were abilities that occasionally had surprising effects. Oftentimes they were much more useful than a simple muscle head. No wonder mental abilities are popular. Speaking of which, Fu Qian pointed to where Chen Mingda was sitting. As a fellow practitioner of mental abilities, he seems quite different from you, doesn't he? You noticed. Wenli giggled. That's right, unlike those of us who awakened later in life, the Chen family has been passing down a secret technique known as the opportunity-attracting spell. Any family member with a talent begins cultivating step by step from a young age. They don't awaken certain special abilities and slowly train them like I did. What they use, those are all cultivation techniques. So it's like tempering a martial artist or swordsman all the way, only focusing on developing mental power. Yes, but I heard that Chen Mingda had mediocre talent since childhood and wasn't really suitable for cultivation. To have grown to where he is today, a massive amount of resources have already been spent. The eldest legitimate son. Fu Qian frowned. Yes, they wouldn't have invested so much if he weren't the eldest legitimate son. However, because of his innate deficiencies, he should have reached his limit. Normally, such people are prone to psychological abnormalities. Fu Qian thought, lifting his head to look at Wenli. Use your emotion amplification ability on me. The effect may not be obvious due to the large difference in our realms. Wenli looked at Fu Qian somewhat hesitantly. No problem, you can't always bully the weak. Watching Fu Qian, who was lazily leaning back in his chair, Wenli took a deep breath. The next moment, Fu Qian felt an invisible surge brush through his heart. The various emotions inside his heart seemed like seeds encountering a spring breeze, quickly growing and sprouting. A distinct feeling of displeasure rose from the depths of his soul. It took Fu Qian a few seconds to figure out where this displeasure was coming from. He was hungry. So, under Wenli's cautious gaze, Fu Qian stood up. Are you okay? I'm fine, where's the dining room? Overall, Wenli's abilities couldn't even be counted as a nuisance. As long as one's own emotions weren't particularly intense, any slight stir could be easily suppressed. The only advantage was that when activated, it was silent and traceless. After eating, Wenli had already arranged for someone to clean up the place to stay. It was evident that Wenli still held a considerable amount of respect for him, having arranged for him a quite secluded spot. The scenery was not only beautiful, but it was also not close to where she lived, very well honoring the promise to disturb as little as possible. Soon night fell, and Fu Qian watched the bamboo forest swaying in the wind outside the window. After a while, Fu Qian suddenly felt something was off. He turned to look at the door. It seemed like someone was standing there. Please come in. Fu Qian called out expressionlessly. The next moment, the door silently opened. A woman dressed as a maid stood rigidly outside the door, her mouth mechanically opening and closing. Hello, I want to play a game with you. Chapter 113, Chapter 113, Chapter 112 Hunter longs for blood, 12_1. Chapter 113, Chapter 112 Hunter longs for blood, 12_1. The situation in Shangjing is quite perilous. I just settled in, and someone was already knocking on my door. Wenli's movements have likely been under surveillance for some time now. Fu Qian looked at the maid outside the door. She appeared to be in her 20s or 30s, with a pretty face, but at the moment her expression was dull and her eyes lifeless, clearly in an abnormal state. This intense sense of déjà vu. Fu Qian couldn't help but reminisce about the time he had poisoned Wenli, feeling a surge of emotion. Being a maid in the Wen family is truly a high-risk job. Next time, I'll suggest to Wenli to raise their wages. Good, I've always enjoyed playing games. Fu Qian responded calmly. As soon as he said this, the maid fell silent for a few seconds, then replied in that mechanical voice. Very well, I hope you can maintain this optimistic mood. After finishing her words, the maid walked stiffly into the room, making her way straight to Fu Qian. The next moment, she lifted the tray in her hand and removed the cloth covering it. Inside the tray were 2 transparent glass vials, each with a capsule of a different color at the bottom. Almost simultaneously, a red fog appeared out of thin air, enveloping Fu Qian within it. The next moment, a heavy sensation came, and Fu Qian felt as if he was encased in red concrete. One red, one green, you need to choose one of the 2 capsules. The maid looked straight at Fu Qian. One is poisonous, the other is not. The woman will place the one you choose into your mouth, then consume the other one herself. If you choose the non-toxic one, the woman will die, the bondage will be broken, and you will be able to free yourself from the current predicament. Otherwise, in at most an hour, you will become a real piece of amber. Choose any one. Fu Qian looked at the maid before him. At this distance, he could clearly see strands of blood seeping from the pores of her body, quickly turning into red fog and constantly converging around both of them. The red fog was clearly using her blood as the source. Another reminder, the voices here can't be heard outside. So I suggest you give up some futile struggles and calmly make a choice, red or green. By your account, if I choose the non-toxic one, this woman will die and the confinement will end. Correct, the only way you can escape is by the death of this woman. That's what makes this game interesting. Of course, you could also make no choice at all and sacrifice yourself to save this woman. But if you actually do that, I would have to commend you. It was such a game. Fu Qian looked at the 2 capsules for a while and finally sighed deeply, a look of disappointment on his face. Is that all? I thought there would be something more interesting. Do you think it's too simple? But you should know that sometimes the simpler the game, the more fun it can be. You better hurry up, my patience is limited. The voice began urging action. You actually think you're so clever? Fu Qian looked at the maid, bleeding all over. I choose the blue pill. The maid was stunned for a few seconds. You seem not to take the game seriously enough. There are only red and green options here. No, there are blue ones. Fu Qian shook his shoulders, accompanied by the sound of ice crystals shattering, and slowly lifted his right leg. I had intended to play along to see if this person had anything interesting to offer, but it turned out to be a complete waste of emotion. The only thing of any interest was this binding ability, which clearly targeted the physical type. If I were only at the 6th phase, it might indeed have been a bit troublesome to free myself. I wanted to interact with you as a transcendent of the 8th phase, but all I got in return was perfunctory treatment. You might not know this, but when I play games, I hate those self-righteous designs the most. It's like shit-flavored chocolate and chocolate-flavored shit, serving no purpose other than to highlight the designer's brain decay. In my opinion, such people should go back to kindergarten to see if they can salvage a bit of their pitiful imagination. You're much stronger than you let on. What is your real purpose for coming here? The maid's face was still expressionless, but her voice clearly showed a fluctuation of emotion. Guess. Also, do you know what the blue pill means? Let's hear it. The popular explanation is, it's like slapping some self-righteous fool in the face through the screen. Don't say I didn't warn you, this woman is just an ordinary person. If you try to attack me by hurting her, it will only be futile, and an innocent person will die because of you, Fu Qian said without a warning. The maid's mouth moved rapidly. Die because of you, huh? All right, I got it. Fu Qian casually responded, his movements never ceasing. Lift foot, turn around, trample. The amber blood shattered with a bang. Fu Qian's body didn't pause, shooting out like lightning. Almost simultaneously, the maid's body bent like a shrimp, retching a mass of blood and flesh. The moment the bloody flesh hit the ground, it quickly twisted into a slender rabbit. This rabbit didn't have a single hair on its body, its crimson flesh exposed directly. Even so, its movements were very swift. As soon as it hit the ground, it bolted with a speed that was almost comical. Fu Qian naturally didn't let it escape easily and gave chase without hesitation. The distance between them closed rapidly. Estimating the distance to the rabbit, Fu Qian suddenly raised his hand, his middle finger instantly elongating into a spear, piercing the air. The skinless rabbit instantly leaped, dodging this piercing strike. However, before it hit the ground again, a flash of blood light appeared on Fu Qian's extended middle finger, which grew even longer. A scarlet whip lashed out in midair, striking the rabbit's body, flipping it completely over and sending blood flying. The rabbit showed an astonishing vitality, flipping over and standing up again after hitting the ground. Just as it tried to flee once more, it suddenly convulsed, losing its balance. The mental impairment effect of the tyrant's fist had been activated. "You, what the hell are you?" exclaimed a voice from within the swollen belly of the rabbit, raspy and filled with intense confusion. At the same time, its body rapidly twisted, unable to maintain the rabbit's shape anymore. "You can call me an agent," Fu Qian replied. Fu Qian stamped down with one foot, giving it no chance to escape. Amid the spray of flesh and blood, a cry as agonized as a bursting testicle echoed to the heavens. After doing all this, Fu Qian looked down at the flesh on the ground. It must have been something like a clone, controlling the woman's actions by hiding in her belly and setting that trap earlier. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so fragile in the face of the tyrant's fist, nearly breaking apart with a single whip. As for the true mastermind behind all this, it was still unknown. In any case, it was good news. Since stirring the grass to startle the snake, movements from all directions had become increasingly frequent. Chapter 114, Chapter 114, Chapter 113, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 13_1. Chapter 114, Chapter 113, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 13_1. "Mr. Fong, are you all right? What happened here?" After the dust had settled, Wenli finally rushed over upon hearing the news, only to be startled by the carnage strewn across the floor. "Nothing much, someone came to me just now and said they wanted to play a game with me." Fu Qian spoke casually. "Then he lost. Also, there's a maid who fainted in my room, you might want to have someone check on her, and it's best to take her for a gastroscopy." Wenli, obviously confused by what she heard, instructed someone to go to Fu Qian's room, then pulled Fu Qian aside to talk privately. Fu Qian briefly recounted what had happened but concealed some details, merely noting someone had controlled the maid to attack him. In fact, from the very beginning, Fu Qian hadn't trusted what that person had said at all. Showing up so promptly to propose a game, 99% likely, was an attempt to test him. What could a game of choosing between a red and green capsule possibly reveal? Courage? Character? Or luck? It was utterly meaningless. Considering how the scene unfolded, Fu Qian even believed that both capsules likely had problems. Randomly ingesting either one could have resulted in the same fate as that of the maid. The so-called choice was nothing but a misdirection. After listening to Fu Qian's story, Wenli turned pale, clearly stirring up some unpleasant memories. It seemed she had a vivid recollection of the incident with the soup too. Who knows if she'll end up firing all the servants and taking matters into her own hands from now on? Well, most likely not. "You're suspecting that monster has been lurking here for quite a while." After a moment, Wenli finally regained composure and asked. "Not for too long, after all, you've been here for less than a month, right?" Fu Qian blinked. He obviously wasn't very good at offering comfort, as Wenli's face grew even paler. Since the game incident, Wenli had become noticeably more anxious. Before, she might have only been aware of the hidden threat, not realizing her house had long been infiltrated like a sieve. So much so that by the next day's breakfast, the dark circles under her eyes were quite pronounced. "Mr. Fong, do you have time today? I plan to make a trip out." Wenli clearly had little appetite, taking only a few sips of clear soup before putting down her spoon and chopsticks. "You're going out? It's not very safe at the moment." Fu Qian asked while eating his breakfast. It must be said that wherever Wenli went, she never skimped on her stomach. The chef's cooking was exceptionally good, turning a simple breakfast into a variety of tempting dishes. "Yes." Wenli nodded firmly. "I know going out increases the risk, but today there's an important person I need to meet." "All right then." Seeing her determination, Fu Qian reluctantly nodded. Of course, what he felt inside was entirely the opposite of what he showed. He was wholeheartedly in favor of Wenli's plan. Although it meant waiting for the rabbit, staying at home all the time clearly wasn't very effective. The most efficient way was to move to where the rabbits were plentiful. Wenli was decisive, quickly arranging the affairs of the house, and the two of them set off promptly. During the car ride, Fu Qian remembered the question Wenli had mentioned before. Speaking of which, from yesterday afternoon until now, have you sensed that malice again? No, not anymore. Wenli shook her head. Since I set out to visit you, that malice has disappeared. Speaking of which, I have you to thank for that. Wenli managed a smile, though it still came off somewhat strained. Just as she was about to say something else, a ringtone suddenly broke the silence. It was Wen Xiuxian calling to check on the situation after hearing about the events here. Sitting to the side, Fu Qian could discern the gravity in the conversation. At this point, Wenli calmed down, gently reassured her father with a couple of words, and mentioned how Uncle Deng had been taking care of her all along, deliberately omitting her own presence. It seemed Fu Qian's previous guess wasn't wrong. Wen Xiuxian probably had quite an unfavorable opinion of him, and Wenli did not want him to know that she had sought Fu Qian out again as a bodyguard. It was a natural human response, understandable. Fu Qian didn't mind at all, but he was rather curious about this Uncle Deng Wenli mentioned. He sounded like an influential figure, and Wen Xiuxian's words seemed full of entrustment, showing great trust in him. Uncle Deng's full name is Deng Feizhou, and he's the person we're going to visit later, Wenli said after hanging up the phone, volunteering the information to Fu Qian. He's a very powerful transcendent who has been an old acquaintance of my father's for many years, and later on, he moved to Shangjing on his own. Before I left this time, my father specifically mentioned that I should pay him a visit. Fu Qian nodded in response. Now that Wenli was a sixth phase transcendent herself, the very powerful transcendent she referred to surely wouldn't be of low caliber. The car twisted and turned before finally stopping in front of a house that radiated a sense of history. Wenli got out and rang the doorbell, and soon the door was opened from the inside. Inside stood a tall, thin middle-aged man with hair that was starting to turn gray. Although his features were unremarkable, the occasional spark of sharpness in his eyes seemed powerful enough to pierce into one's heart. Pretty impressive. Fu Qian silently appraised, finding that Wenli hadn't exaggerated. Uncle Deng. Wenli greeted him with a well-behaved demeanor. Deng Feizhou appeared rather stern, acknowledging her with a slight nod. This is Fang Sun, a friend of mine who's been staying at my place recently. I've brought him along to visit you, Wenli introduced Fu Qian, conveniently sticking to the story of him staying over. Deng Feizhou looked Fu Qian up and down a few times, said nothing, and gestured for the two to enter the house. Compared to where Wenli lived, this manor was undoubtedly more understated, yet a look at the interior decor suggested that its occupant was wealthy or noble. Uncle Deng, I'm sorry to disturb you again today, especially under such special circumstances, Wenli apologized as she sat down, promptly revealing the purpose of their visit by recounting the events of the previous night and her own experience being followed as well. It was clear that she placed significant trust in Uncle Deng. After listening to Wenli, Deng Feizhou was silent for a while before finally speaking. Has anyone from the Chen family contacted you? Yesterday, Chen Mingda came to apologize for the accident at the banquet, and later he even suggested I stay at their manor, Wenli responded. He suggested you stay at Hohai Manor. That's considerate, but actually, it's not very necessary, Deng Feizhou said with a slight frown. I just received news that last night another youngster from the Chen clan was murdered. Because of this, the entire Chen family is extremely angry and cooperating fully with the night watchman to track down Henrik's whereabouts. I believe there will be results soon, so you needn't worry too much. As for the mysterious individual you mentioned residing inside the body, I have never heard of such a thing before. Speaking of which, I just remembered something, Fu Qian suddenly interjected. Remembered what? Wenli looked at him in surprise, while Deng Feizhou's gaze was as piercing as lightning. The day before yesterday, I was taken to Night Watchman Base, where the person in charge, Yuan Shan, personally asked me a few questions. One of them was quite strange. She asked me whether the night watchman who was killed at my shop had spat out anything, Fu Qian said with a serious expression, about to spin a story. Chapter 115, Chapter 115, Chapter 114, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 14_1. Chapter 115, Chapter 114, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 14_1. Yuan Shan asked if anything had been vomited up. After Fu Qian finished speaking, the room fell into a prolonged silence. Both Wenli and Deng Feizhou were clearly shocked by the news. Seeing their reactions, Fu Qian was very satisfied. Lying is an art of mixing truth with falsehood, and the best part was that he really had had a private conversation with Yuan Shan. Any interested party that harbored doubts could easily verify this. Even though Yuan Shan hadn't asked that particular question, he believed no one would go to her in person to check. As for the purpose of saying this, it was actually quite simple. Whether the controlled maid from yesterday was indeed here on behalf of Thorn Blood hadn't been confirmed yet. Now, by outright stating that Yuan Shan was paying attention to similar matters, he was forcibly linking the two together. The man before him, Deng Feizhou, was undoubtedly well informed, and Fu Qian trusted that his words would soon spread throughout Shangjing. If the people behind the scenes truly had something to do with Thorn Blood, he was really looking forward to their reaction after learning they were already under the night watchman's surveillance. If not, then these kinds of minor actions were likely to quiet down for a while, eliminating some distractions for him. Of course, if the news didn't spread at all, that would be even better, indicating that Deng Feizhou was very likely to be problematic. Have you encountered similar situations before? After a long pause, Deng Feizhou finally spoke. No, the person was just shot in the head in front of me. Shot in the head? If Yuan Shan is asking this, it seems the night watchmen have information we don't. If she's really that concerned, I think you should share the details of yesterday with her. I was thinking the same thing. Fu Qian smiled at the latter. I felt that going out was rather dangerous before, but now that I've come outside, I will visit the night watchman base later, hoping this clue will be significant for them. Let's hope so. Deng Feizhou sighed. It's been so many years since Shangjing was this restless, the pressure on Yuan Shan must be immense. It's right to be cautious about your safety, especially Wenli, you are an easy target. Don't worry about me. Wenli nodded seriously. Has something like this happened before? It sounds a bit incredible that a guardian would lose their sanity. The complexity of the supernatural world is far beyond your imagination, Deng Feizhou shook his head. In fact, I have received reliable information these past 2 days that Henrik didn't just watch over a regular materials warehouse, but an especially dangerous restricted area. Restricted area? Fu Qian interjected. I seem to have heard of this term. It's said that someone broke into it the day before yesterday, but I've always been unclear about what a restricted area is for. It's normal for you not to know, that place has always been a secret of the night watchman. As the name implies, the restricted area stores dangerous items. In the supernatural world, not everything is good. For years, the night watchmen, as regulators of the supernatural world, have collected numerous dangerous items. And the most harmful among them are the bodies of transcendence. Bodies. Wenli was surprised. That's right, but not just any transcendence. Usually, only those who are afflicted with an unresolvable corruption that prevents proper burial after death need to be sealed there. I see, this is why Henrik had an incident, because he was dealing with materials that weren't ordinary every day. Wenli realized. Indeed, most bodies, after being sealed and purified over many years, gradually lose their contamination. But there is always a special part, the contamination on the corpse not only doesn't weaken over the years, instead, it can breed something even more dangerous. Deng Feizhou took a deep breath. It is said that the item Henrik stole was something that grew out of a demigod's body. Of course, what he plans to do with it remains unknown to this day. No wonder the forbidden area looked like that, it was essentially a lead coffin. Hearing Deng Feizhou's explanation, Fu Qian thought to himself. So, it was something Henrik took from a demigod's body that caused the remaining parts to mutate. That thing must be the Thorn Blood, no doubt about it. The item I'm looking for actually grew out of a demigod's body, which is somewhat horrifying. This must also be why Yuan Shan didn't go out to capture people and stayed at the base instead, she needed to help suppress the veins that spread across the entire forbidden area. With that, the basic situation seemed to be clear. It could be said that today was quite fruitful. Are you going to the night watchman base? I'll go with you. Wenli didn't bother her elder much, and after a short conversation, she took the initiative to say goodbye and head out, speaking immediately after coming out. Don't you want to go home? Home might not necessarily be safe now. Wenli smiled helplessly. I've got this feeling like a thorn in my side. I hardly slept last night, I feel much safer by your side. I can understand that, come to think of it, this Uncle Deng of yours is quite strong. Wenli nodded. Since I can remember, Uncle Deng has already been a middle-tier transcendent. He, like me, is the kind that awakened later and also possesses mental abilities. No wonder he keeps such a low profile, seems like he doesn't want to bump into that Henrik. Nobody wants to be targeted by a madman. But now I've somewhat changed my mind. Why? Wenli looked puzzled. I just had this hunch that this old Mr. Deng doesn't seem very supportive of me seeking out the night watchman. You noticed too? Wenli was surprised, then leaned in closer and whispered. I also suspect that Uncle Deng has other information that he's not comfortable sharing with us. When you mentioned Yuan Shan earlier, I clearly felt that Uncle Deng's emotions fluctuated quite a bit. He seemed very surprised and puzzled. I didn't expect you to notice it as well. That's right. Emotions that Fu Qian couldn't perceive right now, he wasn't Wenli. The reason he talked nonsense just now was also to take advantage of her ability to perceive emotions. If Deng Feizhou really had no idea about the parasite, when I mentioned Yuan Shan, he would at most seem a bit strange, and his emotions shouldn't have changed too much from before. But now Wenli confirmed that his emotions fluctuated visibly at that time. Such a comparison made his behavior seem a bit deliberate. Even the suggestion he made for me to go find Yuan Shan had a hint of trying to wash his hands of the matter. Still need to keep an eye on this one. Shall we go straight back then? Wenli, of course, had no idea she had been used again, and looked at Fu Qian as she asked. Sure. Miss Wen. Just as the two were about to leave, a shout suddenly came from far away, and upon looking up, they saw a familiar face. It was that Qin Mingfei they had seen at the banquet, rushing over with a group of people. Chapter 116, Chapter 116, Chapter 115, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 15_1. Chapter 116, Chapter 115, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 15_1. Wenli, what are you doing here? Chen Mingfei hastened over and looked at Wenli with a strange expression. Paying a visit to an elder. Wenli explained with a smile. Paying a visit to an elder. Chen Mingfei glanced behind Wenli and then at Fu Qian beside her. And who might this be? Fang Sun, my friend. Seeing that Fu Qian had no intention of speaking, Wenli took the initiative to introduce him, also without elaborating much. A friend. Chen Mingfei sized up Fu Qian, his expression somewhat unfriendly. Compared to Chen Mingda, this cousin of mine shows off quite a bit. Sensing the way Chen Mingfei looked at him, Fu Qian thought to himself. It's not very safe outside right now, best not to stay out too long. After watching Fu Qian for a while, Chen Mingfei turned back to Wenli and said. Thank you for the reminder. Actually, we were just preparing to head back. Are you leading a team to capture the fugitive night watchman? You too? Could it be that you live together? Chen Mingfei's frown deepened, but he still answered patiently. Yes, another member of the Chen family was victimized yesterday. The second uncle issued an order for everyone to mobilize and find that person's trail. We won't rest until he's caught. Then you should also be careful. Wenli politely reminded. Don't worry. That guy is now a bloodthirsty beast, acting solely on instinct. He has the realm but is absolutely nothing to fear. This flag is raised way too skillfully. Fu Qian, who had been disinterested in the conversation, couldn't help but inwardly comment. Maybe I should let Wenli go home first, and then stealthily follow this guy. I have a feeling that after this conversation, the likelihood of him being targeted just rose by 80%. Chen Mingfei was obviously very attentive towards Wenli, showing rare patience. He kept saying not to stay outdoors for too long, but was actually chatting with Wenli on and off. It's not safe outside now. Miss Wen, would you like to stay at the manor until the crisis is over and then we can escort you home? Just like family, thinking almost exactly like Chen Mingda. No, that won't be necessary. Wenli's reaction was also consistent as she smiled and shook her head. With Mr. Fang here, my safety isn't an issue. Intentional. It's like openly asking me to attract hate points. Fu Qian glanced at Wenli and noticed her looking at him with pleading eyes. Do you want me to help get rid of the nuisance? This time I'll let it slide, but next time you'd better discuss it with me in advance. We should talk about the fees then. By this time, Chen Mingfei had already been bothered to look over again. Mr. Fang seems quite unfamiliar. Have you just arrived in Shangjing? The way these scions of noble family speak really goes round and round. What he's getting at probably translates to, who the hell are you, coming to Shangjing to beg? Fu Qian glanced at Chen Mingfei, effectively treating him as thin air. Mr. Fang, quite a personality you have. Chen Mingfei bit his teeth in a mixture of embarrassment and anger, a surge of murderous intent churning inside him. Something seems off. Fu Qian ignored him completely, first looking up at the sky, then suddenly grabbed Wenli and pulled her back one step. The next instant, a streak of light descended from the sky. Amid a series of screams, members of the Chen clan youngsters fell in droves. This is... Everyone looked at the figure that appeared in the center. Deformed limbs, tattered clothing. On a face covered with dark blood vessels were the crimson eyes of a wild beast. Henrik. Although his features were somewhat distorted, one could still make out the appearance of Henrik from the banquet. The fish has taken the bait. Today's catch is not just bountiful, it's downright explosive. Only, this fish seems a bit too large. Fu Qian sized up Henrik and could clearly feel that compared to during the banquet, the former night watchman's aura had become exceedingly strong. If it weren't for the chaotic and violent aura, one might almost feel like they were facing a demigod, such was the fierceness of the killing intent that it seemed almost tangible. Has he really gone into a berserk level up? Henrik. Finally realizing what was happening, Wenli cautiously approached, holding her breath and concealing her presence. It should be. No sooner had Fu Qian finished speaking than Henrik's blood-red eyes looked over. Violent, crazy. There was a feeling of being targeted by a wild beast. The rumors are true, it's highly likely that his mind is gone. At this moment, Henrik's figure disappeared from its spot once again. So fast. Is the target Wenli? As the only one who could catch the movements of this adversary, Fu Qian quickly made a judgment. Unfortunately, the latter was choking, her body stiff, completely immobile. Locked in the murderous intent of Henrik, Wenli, the support staff, had no capacity to resist, not even able to make a move to dodge. In this situation, without a second word, Fu Qian kicked out. Wenli, in the end, couldn't escape being kicked away. But that very kick saved her life. A streak of light flashed, and Henrik appeared where Wenli had stood, with a deep trench beneath his feet. This was merely a regular swipe of his claw. Looking at that terrifying trace. It must be said that although Yuan Shen's skills seemed magical before, now the physical type is more appealing. Missing with his strike, Henrik hardly paused before his gaze shifted to Fu Qian. The next moment, a strangely shaped long blade ripped through Fu Qian's figure. However, it was only a figure after all. Fu Qian sidestepped, dodging the blow. The sword's light whirled, mixed with roaring howls. Seemingly realizing only Fu Qian could pose a threat, Henrik launched a tempestuous assault. What a grudge! Fu Qian dodged all the while, feeling astonished. Thanks to the rigorous training on the Ring Islands, his body was now agile and seemed to stroll leisurely among the flurry of sword gleams and claw shadows. Considering his prior performance at the Night Watchman base, he didn't plan on revealing certain abilities here. It's time to switch to some other skills. Amidst continuous close combat, Fu Qian finally found an opening and swiftly made consecutive points with his finger. 5 air bullets whistled out. Sure enough, facing this kind of attack, the frenzied Henrik did not dodge or evade, opting to tough it out and take damage for damage. With consecutive sounds, the 5 bullets all hit their mark, not causing substantial injury, yet the immense force momentarily staggered Henrik. Seizing that instant, Fu Qian flashed to his back. Henrik's back was still a blur of flesh and blood. The wound left by old Master Chen was still there. It was just too perfect. Fu Qian did not hesitate to reach out. Without triggering his mythical form, he directly executed a visceral critical strike. The next moment, Henrik let out an earth-shattering roar, lunging violently forward. As his innards gushed out, his spine nearly disintegrated. Yet Henrik demonstrated an exaggeratedly strong life force, somehow still not falling. Instead, he raised his head and let out a terrifyingly mournful howl. At his feet, the trembling Chen Mingfei was desperately backing away. Chapter 117, Chapter 117, Chapter 116, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 16_1. Chapter 117, Chapter 116, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 16_1. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. This was the first time Henrik had made a sound since he appeared. Although the wound on his back was horrific, he still hadn't fallen. Clink. The long sword in his hand was thrown to the ground, and Henrik collapsed into a pool of blood. Those were the remnants of the Chen clan youngsters he had slaughtered upon his arrival. Positioning his limbs like an animal, he actually began to devour the limbs on the ground. The crunching sound of chewing rose. This shocking scene nearly scared Chen Mingfei out of his wits. As large chunks of flesh were consumed, Henrik's body began to tremble, and needle-like hair started to grow all over his face and limbs. Not only that, but white bones protruded from the wound on his back, quickly forming two ghastly bone plates. Damn, even. The spot of the visceral critical strike is gone. Has he completely turned into a beast? Fu Qian frowned at the sight. Let's set aside the transformation for a moment, but aren't you a bit too obsessed? In his field of vision, the transformed Henrik had raised his head once again. His face smeared with blood, he was still fixated on him. Weren't you only interested in the mental type? Logically, any of these people here should be more delicious than me, right? Why are you so fixated on me? Not to mention far away, there's a tender and chewy Wenli right beside you. Despite his complaints, seeing the crazed look in Henrik's eyes, Fu Qian wasn't afraid. Though after transforming, Henrik exuded an aura that faintly resembled that of a demigod. However, trading intelligence for power had some obvious flaws. The actions of animals are always easier to predict than those of humans. Like now, for example. The next moment, the four-legged Henrik became a blur of blood-red light, charging headfirst towards him. It's that predictable boar charge. When Henrik had been preparing the move, Fu Qian had already been reminded of the crocodile monster he had torn apart with his own hands. It turned out his guess was correct. But the strength of a demigod level is truly extraordinary. Even having anticipated the move, the terrifying speed almost left him unable to react in time. As Fu Qian dodged, Henrik's pointed teeth almost clamped down on his throat. Narrowly avoiding the strike, Fu Qian quickly put some distance between them. In theory, against such an opponent, he could simply replicate the strategy used to kill the crocodile monster by transforming his hand into a spear and engaging directly. At worst, he'd sustain some injuries, but Fu Qian was confident he could exhaust Henrik to death. But on one hand, Fu Qian didn't want to reveal his ability to transform, and on the other, he didn't want to appear overly spectacular. Actually killing a demigod-level creature by oneself would surely raise suspicions. Most importantly, even after confronting the prime subject, there was still no sign of any thorn blood. Just earlier, he had personally unleashed a visceral critical strike, and Henrik's blood could be seen splattered everywhere, yet there didn't seem to be anything special about it. All this gave Fu Qian a premonition that even if he killed Henrik here, he might not find any thorn blood. So, better not to reveal anything. Fu Qian quickly made up his mind, and right then, Henrik's second charge arrived. This time the speed seemed a tad slower. Fu Qian easily dodged and glanced to the side. Wenli, who had risen to her feet, was standing to one side with pursed lips, her eyes fixed on Henrik. An emotional amplifier. Fu Qian's thoughts stirred, the girl still had some courage, far better than the one who did nothing but scream. Even so, causing any interference to someone like Henrik would normally be close to impossible. But Henrik was already in a berserk state, his emotions extremely intense, so in the end there was a slight effect. Amplified by emotional augmentation, the once again thwarted Henrik let out a painful roar, repeatedly slamming his head against the ground numerous times. However, what was exasperating was that after the head slamming, an even more frenzied Henrik lifted his head, still staring intently over here. It proved that when Li's attack had not managed to pull aggro. Was his own taunt level really that high? Fu Qian lamented once again. But it didn't matter, he had seen all sorts of situations before. Fu Qian snorted, and the next moment a crimson whip appeared, striking Henrik. Tyrant's fist, each lash could cause the target to lose their mind. In fact, he wasn't very sure if it would work, especially against a target that had already lost their mind. But he was also a bit curious about what level Tyrant's fist could reach when combined with Wenli's emotional amplification. Continuously dodging attacks, Fu Qian's whip kept lashing out at Henrik. And as he was repeatedly struck, Henrik became even more crazed, his body beginning to sprout sharp bone spikes, his appearance becoming even more hideous. However, Fuqian had slowly caught up with his pace, making all attacks futile. It was only a matter of time before he went down. Once again dodging Henrik's headlong rush, Fuqian heard a scream from behind. Turning his head to look, he saw Chen Mingfei clutching his leg and screaming. The guy had just gotten up and moved to the side to hide, but unfortunately had bad luck, getting hit by the bricks and stones flung by Henrik's charge, and was instantly wounded. Perhaps the screams piqued his interest, but Henrik's completely blood-red eyes finally moved off Fuqian and fixed on Chen Mingfei. The latter was utterly horrified, subconsciously wanting to flee. But being directly targeted by a demigod, his reaction was just like Wen Li's, completely stiff and unable to move. Just as Chen Mingfei fell into a dire situation, the next moment an invisible force appeared. This force moved him sideways by several meters, allowing him to dodge Henrik's lethal charge. I heard some noise over here. Deng Feizhou appeared at the side, his expression grave as he surveyed the surroundings and gave Fuqian a deep look. Didn't expect him to come over here. Leave it to me, Deng Feizhou said as he gestured with his hand, pushing Chen Mingfei back another 2 steps. Bang bang. Simultaneously, a dull explosion sounded, and 2 red whirlwinds appeared beneath Henrik's feet. The bodies of 2 Qin clan youngsters exploded almost at the same time. The splattered flesh and blood hit Henrik with such force that it nearly tipped him over. The power was considerable. Fuqian nodded, showing no sign of stepping forward to finish the job, instead taking on the role of a spectator. Taken by surprise, Henrik roared again, flipping to his feet and locking his gaze on Deng Feizhou. The next moment, he bent his body, bent his knees and leaped high. Was that jump a bit too high? Fuqian watched Henrik in the air. He leaped over the remnants, over the treetops, over Deng Feizhou, and finally landed directly on the rooftop behind. Such a grand display, and he's running away. Where do you think you're going? Deng Feizhou huffed, stretching his hand and grasping at the void. Henrik on the rooftop stiffened, as if held by an invisible hand. However, after only half a second, Henrik bellowed to the sky, a terrifying force erupting from him. Deng Feizhou grunted, his hand loosening. The constraints on Henrik shattered, and he quickly vanished from sight. Chapter 118, Chapter 118, Chapter 117, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 17_1. Chapter 118, Chapter 117, The Hunter's Thirst for Blood, 17_1. The scene was extremely awkward at one point. Everyone looked in the direction Henrik had escaped, all somewhat dazed. Deng Feizhou, who had been full of confidence, now had a serious expression on his face. This guy is even more troublesome than I imagined. With a light cough, he looked at Wen Li not far away. Wen Li, are you all right? Uncle Deng, I'm fine, thank you for coming to my rescue. I didn't help much. Deng Feizhou shook his head, turning his gaze towards Fuqian. Your friend here really keeps his cards close to his chest. Mr. Fang is indeed a powerful transcendent, he has saved me several times already. Wen Li looked at Fuqian, knowing he didn't like disclosing information, so she didn't say too much. Of course, she didn't know much to begin with. You're not bad yourself, don't sell yourself short. To face a creature of demigod level and still do your best to seize the opportunity to attack, it's this courage alone that already surpasses many. As soon as Deng Feizhou said this, Chen Mingfei immediately felt awkward. As one of the outstanding members of his generation in the Chen family, and already a genuine 6th phase transcendent, his performance just now had been far from good. And all this had been witnessed by Wen Li. Chen Mingfei felt rather frustrated, even somewhat relieved that almost all of the people he had brought with him were dead. As for Fuqian, he didn't even dare to raise his head to look at this mysterious person, his heart full of fear. The guy seemed average in terms of strength, but who would have thought he could be so formidable? He could even hold his ground against the frenzied Henrik for so long. Fuqian's composure when facing a demigod, his ruthless and determined actions, replayed over and over in his mind. It was good that there had been no actual conflict just now, otherwise. Although he had the entire Qin family behind him, some madmen didn't care about consequences. Fuqian was probably the calmest one amongst the group. He hadn't used his full strength just now, otherwise, a visceral critical strike in mythical form could have possibly taken Henrik down immediately. His mission was to find Thorn Blood. Since there was no sign of it on Henrik, it was better to wait and see how things would unfold. Miss Wen. At that moment, a shout came from afar, and a group of people rushed over. The two leading them were none other than Chen Mingda and the poker face from the night watchman. The newcomers were startled by the disarray as they approached. We heard fighting from over here and hurried over. Chen Mingda was relatively composed as he looked around, finally resting his gaze on Chen Mingfei's face. Mingfei, did you encounter the target? Are you all right? Otherwise what? We're slaughtering each other for fun here. Chen Mingfei clearly did not appreciate his brother's concern and found a vent for the frustration he had been holding in. Chen Mingda frowned but didn't say anything, instead turning to Wenli. Miss Wen, are you okay? Thank you for your concern, I'm fine. Wenli shook her head, her emotions mostly settled down by now. Mr. Deng is also here, what exactly happened here? Did Henrik kill all these people? Poker Face asked Deng Feizhou on the side, indicating they had known each other for some time. Yes. Deng Feizhou took a deep breath. The situation was extremely dangerous just now. Henrik suffered serious injuries, but he became even more frenzied, nearly reaching demigod level strength. Demigod level. Poker Face was taken aback. Yes, I was careless for a moment. Deng Feizhou shook his head. I thought we could hold him, but I didn't expect him to break free. You're being too modest, if it weren't for you, Mingfei might not have made it. Chen Mingda added from the side. I don't deserve such credit, their survival is mainly due to Mr. Fang holding Henrik off. Deng Feizhou pointed at Fu Qian. Him. Even Poker Face couldn't keep his expression steady now, sizing up Fu Qian with a gaze full of surprise and suspicion. He naturally remembered this man. Poker Face had been present when Yuan Shan had interrogated Fu Qian. But no matter what, Fu Qian still looked like a low-level transcendent, and it was completely unimaginable that he could confront Henrik. Yes, if it hadn't been for Mr. Fang, we might have been completely wiped out just now. So it was like that. Poker Face took a deep look at Fu Qian before turning to walk to the side, and after a moment, he turned back. Mr. Fang, I have reported the situation here, and our leader would like to meet you. I wonder if you have the time. Yuan Shan wanted to see me. It was somewhat understandable, given the vast difference in the way I had acted before and now. I would definitely be considered highly suspicious. Someone with a more volatile temper might have arrested me on the spot. No problem. Fu Qian blinked. There's no time to delay. Poker Face turned his head and gestured for two people to come over. I'll lead people to track Henrik's whereabouts, you will escort Mr. Fang to the base. Just showing the way, and it takes two people. Are they afraid I'll run away? Fu Qian shook his head inwardly. Can I come along? Just then, Wenli beside him asked cautiously. Go together. Poker Face clearly wasn't familiar with Wenli, and he found her request a bit odd, but naturally assumed she was Fu Qian's companion and immediately nodded. Of course, you can. This Mr. Fang was mysterious and unpredictable, it might actually be better to have someone who seemed more normal accompany him. Are they that afraid? Fu Qian looked at Wenli who had approached him, and she seemed visibly relieved. But thinking about it, it made sense. In the past few days, she really had encountered ghosts wherever she went, so such feelings were understandable. It's not easy being the daughter of destiny. Soon, the night watchman base was already in sight. Fu Qian wasn't taken to the interrogation room he was in last time but was escorted further up to an area that resembled an office. Welcome. The night watchman leading the way knocked on the door, and unlike last time, Yuan Shan was already inside waiting. Hello, Mr. Fang. Wenli obediently waited outside, while Fu Qian pushed the door and entered. Yuan Shan set down the documents in her hands and looked up with a charming and cheerful smile. A transcendent had been killed in your territory, and your mood still seems quite good. Don't you have KPIs to assess? Mr. Fang is quite mysterious, I must admit that even I was deceived last time. My apologies. Indicating for Fu Qian to sit down, Yuan Shan looked at him with a smile on her face. No problem, I'm a very low-key person. Indeed low-key, in fact, I have an interesting piece of information here. Yuan Shan fluttered the documents in her hand. Not long ago, a Mr. Chang Jian approached us, stating that he had been carjacked and knocked unconscious. Interestingly, my people checked into it. And it turns out that during the time he was unconscious, he still managed to attend a banquet. Isn't that curious? That was me. Fu Qian said candidly. If Yuan Shan brought it up, it was better to just admit it openly. He didn't believe the night watchmen would trouble themselves over such a minor issue. Mr. Fang is truly honest. May I ask why you did it? Yuan Shan chuckled as she looked at him. Because I needed to attend the banquet, but I didn't have an invitation. That is a reason. Yuan Shan nodded, apparently quite accepting of the explanation. All right then, let's get down to business. Chapter 119, Chapter 119, Chapter 118, The Hunter Craves Blood, 18_1. Chapter 119, Chapter 118, The Hunter Craves Blood, 18_1. So we're back on track now. As expected, rules are only for ordinary people. Although Fu Qian believed that as long as there was a necessary reason, the night watchman would not hesitate to take action against anyone. But the probability of them causing him trouble over such trivial matters was too slim. Moreover, other than possibly catching a cold, that brother Chang Jian was hardly hurt at all. It's quite normal for transcendents to have some minor frictions, we can't cover everything. Yuan Shan spoke as if it were a matter of course. Besides, didn't you save someone at the banquet? Now that you mention it, it does seem reasonable. Fu Qian nodded. However, there's one question that I'm rather curious about. Yuan Shan abruptly changed the topic. And that is, why? You said earlier that you needed to attend the banquet, but why was it necessary? I believe you must have a special reason. Of course, there was a reason, but he couldn't tell her. Fu Qian blinked, he had been prepared for this. He gestured towards the outside. I was once entrusted to ensure the safety of that person outside. Wen Li. Is she really that well known? Most transcendents have records within the Night Watchman, and Wen Li belongs to a rather special category. The Night Watchman has always been paying attention to her and is pleased with her smooth development. Attention, or vigilance. Fu Qian still remembered what the Night Watchman, Qi Shui, had said. The upper echelons of the Night Watchman obviously had an ambivalent attitude towards Wen Li. As for her advancement, they pretty much adopted a wait-and-see approach. You seem to know quite a bit. Yuan Shan's smile faded, and she gave Fu Qian a deep look. For someone who's been entrusted, that's not too much. For instance, I only know that you're wary of her but not specifically why. If that's a question you truly want an answer to. Yuan Shan pressed a switch beside her. Then come with me. Silently, the wall on the side of the office moved. A dark gate opened, revealing a small elevator. So secretive, your private elevator. Yes, people in leadership should have some privileges, otherwise what's all the hard work for? Yuan Shan gestured, signaling Fu Qian to join her inside. The elevator descended steadily. Judging from its speed and the time elapsed, they must have reached the underground levels. As expected. When the elevator doors opened, a dark corridor lay before them, lit by a familiar flickering light. This scene, he'd just seen it not too long ago. Fu Qian reflected inwardly. This passageway has been here for 100 years. Yuan Shan walked lightly ahead, casually opening the door at the end of the corridor. The familiar stench hit them face on. Despite being mentally prepared, Fu Qian still scrunched his brow in discomfort. Before them was the banishment zone he had visited before. Though it seemed there had been some mitigation compared to his last visit, it was still quite unpleasant. This is the banishment zone, I believe you've heard of it. Yes, in some recent rumors. The rumors are mostly true, Henrik had been stationed here for many years. Yuan Shan walked ahead emotionlessly. Guarding the containment area is a dangerous job, and though Henrik wasn't the strongest, he was undoubtedly one of the most dedicated. I deeply regret what happened to him. When you saw him today, was his condition already very bad? Yuan Shan asked. It depends on how you look at it. His consciousness seemed almost shattered, to the point where he couldn't even remotely detonate heads anymore, and his method of killing reverted to pure melee. However, at the same time, his vitality had increased, almost to a demigod level. While responding, Fuqian examined his surroundings. Compared to his previous visit, the veins on the wall were still there, but they seemed somewhat retracted, suggesting they had been temporarily suppressed. Not far away, an elderly man with white hair opened his eyes, examined Fuqian, and then closed his eyes to rest. Another fourth phase. Fuqian recognized him, one of the 3 people who were with Yuan Shan during his last visit. So he really is a guard here. Alas. Yuan Shan sighed faintly. Do you know the origins of the containment area? I heard it's used to store the bodies of contaminated transcendents. That's right. Do you know where the contamination comes from? I really don't know that. Fuqian shook his head honestly. There are actually many types of contamination at the transcendent level, like this one here. At this moment, the 2 had walked around the corner, and right in front of them was the damaged room. The contents inside were still not calm, and although wrapped in layers of black cocoons, they continued to struggle slightly. With a wave of her hand, Yuan Shan summoned a black ribbon out of thin air that reinforced the cocoon, further restraining its movements. This corpse is from a transcendent of a bygone era. He had a very special ability, which was to enhance his strength by devouring other people's flesh and blood, causing tremendous casualties at the time. Until the night watchman exterminated him, he had ascended to a demigod level. A cannibalistic demigod. How many heads had he devoured? The image of Henrik consuming people flashed through Fuqian's mind. Let me guess, he didn't just specialize in consuming psychics, did he? That feels a bit discriminatory. Psychic, physical, these are just too crude a division, Yuan Shan shook her head. Transcendent abilities are ever-changing, how can they be so simply summarized? Anyway, this individual's ability brought him strength as well as contamination. After he was killed, his body was immediately sealed here. However, over the years, the contamination within the body not only didn't dissipate, it actually began to grow and even bear fruit. Thorn blood. When Yuan Shan spoke of bearing fruit, Fuqian immediately thought of his mission target. The thing that grew from the corpse is ominously mysterious, and anyone who comes into prolonged contact with it will unintentionally be affected, becoming bloodthirsty and craving fresh flesh. We take it very seriously and take all possible precautions. Unfortunately, Henrik still. Yuan Shan let out a sigh. I understand the contamination part now, but if you're showing me all this, you're worried about Wenli. All the bodies stored here have various types of contamination. Although most aren't as intense as this one, letting any of them loose could lead to all sorts of adverse effects. It's unfortunate that up to now, we still cannot determine the exact cause of the contamination. We can only be extra cautious of some special abilities. Wenli's abilities are rather unique, hence she has been placed under observation, or rather, monitoring. So that's how it is. In fact, there have been many abnormalities here recently, not just Henrik getting contaminated and then stealing dangerous items. The day before yesterday, there was even someone who attempted to break in here and injured 3 night watchman members. As Yuan Shan said this, she glanced at Fuqian, intentionally or not. Oh, that was me too. Fuqian nodded again, unflustered. Part 7 of the series ends here. Thank you for watching and listening. If you find it interesting, please give us a like, a comment and a subscription so that we have the motivation to make the next videos.